Chapter 1911. Fortunately, they didn't seem to be interested in her. Yi Qianshan didn't make a sound, afraid that they would notice her. However, she couldn't hide from them in the end. "Qianshan, come over and meet someone," Shenjilia said. Yi Qianshan finished wrapping the last dumpling and replied, "Sure." She washed her hands nervously. After making sure that she was clean and that her face and hands weren't stained with flour, she walked out. Shenjilia sat in the middle of a group of old people. He looked young and handsome. When he saw Yi Qianshan, Shenjilia waved at her and said, "Come over and meet the elders." Yi Qianshan was a little embarrassed. She looked at them and said, "Hello, Grandpa and Grandma. My name is Yi Qianshan. She's my girlfriend." The old people looked at Yi Qianshan and then turned to look at each other. They seemed to be speaking in a dialect, but Yi Qianshan felt a little more at ease when she saw their eyes. They didn't seem to be particularly dissatisfied with her. "Come over here." Shenjilia waved at Yi Qianshan. Yi Qianshan walked over to Shenjilia and sat down. Shenjilia introduced them and said, "This is Grandpa Wang Yu." "Hello, Grandpa Wang Yu." "This is Grandma Dongfang." "Dongfang?" Yi Qianshan rarely saw people with multiple surnames. She couldn't help but take a second look and obediently greeted, "Hello, Grandma Dongfang. This is Grandpa Nanfeng." She recognized them one by one. In fact, Yi Qianshan felt that they all looked similar and didn't remember a single one of them. The smiles on their faces were quite amiable, but for some reason Yi Qianshan's hair stood on end when they stared at her. It was lunchtime and all the grandparents ate. Nanny he had woken up early to make dumplings. Yi Qianshan helped entertain the guests. Later, the guests followed old Mrs. Shun to the study to chat. It wasn't until 3 in the afternoon that the guests were sent off. An old woman with white hair and a bun held Yi Qianshan's hand before she left. She smiled warmly and said, "Good girl." Yi Qianshan was stunned. She didn't understand what she meant. She smiled, but before she could say anything, the old woman let go of her hand and left with her old companions. After Yi Qianshan and Shenjilia saw the guests off, Shenjilia turned to look at her. Shenjilia's eyes seemed to carry a strange scrutinizing look. Yi Qianshan felt strange all over. She waved her hand and said, "What are you doing? Grandma Dongfang actually likes you very much." Grandma Dongfang has the best relationship with Grandma. She's just as difficult to deal with as Grandma. Yi Qianshan looked at Shenjilia. Ah. When Yi Qianshan heard the news, she was shocked. Is it that strange? Then why did she say that I'm a good girl? I don't know either. Shenjilia smiled happily. No matter what, it's a good thing that the old man likes you. Don't you agree? Yi Qianshan had a nagging feeling that something was amiss. She nodded her head and said, "That makes sense." When Yi Qianshan returned to the house, old Mrs. Shun was sitting in the living room, munching on melon seeds. When she saw Yi Qianshan enter, she said, "Jilia, go and cut some fruit for me." Shenjilia glanced at the old lady and then at Yi Qianshan. "Qianshan, come here." Chapter 1912. Shenjilia glanced at her, then smiled and walked into the kitchen. "Qianshan," old Mrs. Shun called out. Yi Qianshan immediately tensed up and replied, "Yes, yes. Grandma, I'm here." "Don't be nervous. Is Grandma scary?" Old Mrs. Shun looked at her helplessly and said, "Although Grandma is a little strict with you at times, it's not to the extent that you're so afraid of me now." Yi Qianshan smiled. She was too embarrassed to say anything. Yes, she was afraid. After all, she was not that strict with herself. When old Mrs. Shun saw Yi Qianshan's reaction, she laughed and asked, "You met all my friends just now, didn't you?" "Yes, I have. Dongfang is my good friend. We've known each other for decades. She likes you very much." It was Grandma Dongfang who had just spoken to him. Yi Qianshan looked up at old Mrs. Shun. Old Mrs. Shun's eyes were fixed on Yi Qianshan's face. She nodded her head and said, "You're not bad looking. You have good physiognomy. I liked you a lot when I first met you." As she spoke, she subconsciously glanced at Yi Qianshan's hand. Yi Qianshan met the old lady's gaze and opened her palm. There was a red line there. Very light, very light. Old Mrs. Shun leaned forward to take a look. Yi Qianshan was shocked and instinctively withdrew her hand. "Let me take a look." Old Mrs. Shun stood up and walked over to Yi Qianshan. Yi Qianshan was a little scared. When she saw old Mrs. Shun, she shrank back. When old Mrs. Shun saw Yi Qianshan's reaction, she felt a little upset. He muttered, "What are you afraid of? Will I eat you?" He reached out and grabbed Yi Qianshan's wrist. Yi Qianshan consciously opened her palm. Soon, a faint red line appeared on old Mrs. Shun's palm. It has faded. Old Mrs. Shen looked at him. How did you do this? Yi Qianshan looked at her palms. I don't know either. Moreover, has it faded? Why didn't she feel anything? It's good that it has faded, it's good that it has faded. It was as if she had been possessed by a ghost. Yi Qianshan felt her hair stand on end. This old lady was poisonous. He had only said a few words, but she was already scared out of her wits. Yi Qianshan retracted her hand and took a look at herself. Has it faded? Perhaps it was because she stared at him every day, but she didn't notice any changes at all. Old Mrs. Shen stared at her for a long time and suddenly asked, When are you going to get married? Yi Qianshan couldn't react for a moment. Let me ask you, when are you planning to get married? Julia isn't young anymore. It's not good for you to keep dragging it out. Yi Qianshan felt a little confused and said, Didn't you forbid us from getting married? Nonsense. Old Mrs. Shen had a look of rebuke on her face as she said, Didn't you come to our house for the new year? Do you think that just anyone can come to our house to eat and stay with us? Isn't it because you are my future granddaughter-in-law? Otherwise I wouldn't have let you in. Yi Qianshan smiled awkwardly and replied, Is that so? Hee, what else? As old Mrs. Shen spoke, she took out an old almanac from under the table and said, Let me look at the date. Just now, Dongfang said that Julia's wedding should be held in spring. It's not the new year yet, so the preparations are just in time. Yi Qianshan felt that the old lady must have seen a ghost. She had changed too quickly. Chapter 1913. Yi Qianshan was at a loss for words. What do you mean by divorce when you want to? Yi Qianshan looked at the old lady flipping through the calendar. She pursed her lips and said, We won't divorce. Old Mrs. Shen looked up at Yi Qianshan and said, That's for the best. I do hope that you won't divorce and stay together for the rest of your lives. It'll be nice to be happy. But, it's hard to change one's fate. Old Mrs. Shen didn't finish her sentence. She was focused on looking at the days. Yi Qianshan felt uncomfortable. Did this old lady really want them to get a divorce? Annoying. Shenjilia quickly cut the fruit and inserted a few fruit forks into it. He picked up a piece of apple and handed it to Yi Qianshan. Yi Qianshan didn't dare take it. She glanced at the old lady. Shenjilia said, Grandma, the fruit is here. Okay. You guys eat. Grandma is busy. Old Mrs. Shen squinted her eyes for a while. She couldn't see clearly, so she found a box under the coffee table and took out a pair of reading glasses. Shenjilia shrugged and handed the apple to Yi Qianshan. The apple was soaked in salt water after it was cut. Tasted pretty good. Most importantly, it didn't turn yellow. Yi Qianshan took a bite. Shenjilia sat beside her and asked softly, What did Grandma say to you? Yi Qianshan glanced at Shenjilia and said, That we get married. Shenjilia almost choked on the apple. He looked at Yi Qianshan in disbelief and asked, Really? Before Yi Qianshan could reply, Shenjilia looked at old Mrs. Shen and asked, Grandma, do you want us to get married? Old Mrs. Shen glanced at Shenjilia. When she saw the ecstatic smile on her grandson's face, she laughed and said, Yes. Are you happy? Are you surprised? Shenjilia was about to go crazy. He quickly walked over and hugged old Mrs. Shen excitedly. Grandma, I love you. Old Mrs. Shen was enjoying it but also disgusted. She pushed Shenjilia away and said with a disgusted expression, You're so annoying. Who wants you to love me? Go love your wife. Shenjilia was overjoyed. He jumped up and returned to Yi Qianshan's side. He kissed her hard on the cheek and said, Honey, I love you. Wifey. Yi Qianshan blushed at the way he addressed her. She felt guilty and couldn't help but ask, Can we really get married? Of course, Grandma said it's okay, so we can definitely get married. Shenjilia had complete faith in old Mrs. Shen. He stood up and said, That's right. Let's talk to your father about this and make him happy. As he spoke, Shenjilia stepped forward to make the call. However, Yi Qianshan went forward to hold him back and said, Wait a minute. Are you sure it's okay? Didn't grandmother and Uncle Blind Man say that I have to wait until I'm 28 years old? When did I say you're going to be 28? Old Mrs. Shen looked aggrieved and said, I only said that you might not live past the age of 28. Yi Qianshan was speechless. Shenjilia replied, You might as well say you got married at 28. Old Mrs. Shen was obviously in a good mood. She said, It doesn't matter. If you want to get married, just get married. Julia isn't young anymore and neither are you. It won't be too late to have children in a few years. Chapter 1914. For the next few days, Yi Qianshan followed Shenjilia around. On New Year's Eve the family had dinner together. Shen Luo rushed home, but he was nowhere to be seen the next day. On the first and third days of the new year, Shinjilia took Yi Qianqian everywhere to play. On the second and fourth day of the new year he would bring her around as a guest. Whenever he caught someone he would say, "My wife is getting married. When the time comes don't forget the red packet." Yi Qianqian felt both awkward and amused at the same time. After the fifth day of the new year, Shinjilia couldn't wait to return to Yun Town with Yi Qianqian. As soon as they arrived home, Shinjilia carried his luggage and walked in. He called out, "Uncle, we're back." Yi Zhenhua was entertaining guests at home, and the neighbors were chatting happily. When they heard Shinjilia's shout, everyone looked over. Yi Zhenhua smiled and said, "My daughter has returned." Putting down the teacup, Yi Zhenhua walked out. She asked, "Dad, why didn't you close the door? What if someone came in?" Shinjilia walked into the house. Then he entered the living room and saw his uncles. Yi Qianqian introduced them one by one before pulling Shinjilia over and introducing him to them. "This is my boyfriend. His name is Shinjilia. You can just call him Xiaoshin." Qianqian has grown up and has a boyfriend. He's so handsome. Qianqian is also a great beauty. It's only right for her to have a handsome boyfriend. The uncles spoke in a dialect. Yi Qianqian smiled as she listened to them. She took her luggage and returned to her room. Yi Zhenhua poured a cup of tea for Shinjilia and asked, "Why are you back so soon? I thought you weren't coming back." Shinjilia smiled sheepishly and said, "Qianqian will be going back to work in a few days, so I thought I'd come back to play for a few days and visit you." As he spoke, he suddenly thought of something and said, "My father asked me to bring you something. I'll bring it over for you." Shen Longyue was unable to come. There were many things to do before and after the new year. Therefore he had specially asked Shinjilia to bring some cigarettes and alcohol. He also bought an antique thumb ring. Yi Zhenhua was not interested in cigarettes and alcohol, but he was interested in the thumb ring. He took it and examined it, saying, "It's really beautiful. This jade is not cheap." Yi Zhenhua was smoking a cigarette. He took it out and put it out. "Why are you being so polite? We'll be a family sooner or later. I haven't even paid a visit yet." He nodded his head and said, "Sooner or later we'll be family. By the way, uncle, I'm here to tell you that Qianqian and I are getting married." Yi Zhenhua chuckled. "Didn't you tell me before?" Shinjilia exclaimed in surprise and asked, "Did she say that? Why don't I remember?" "Yes, he told me a few days ago. He told me again yesterday and again today. This is the third time." Yi Zhenhua smiled and shook his head. "Are young people so stupid?" Shinjilia was a little embarrassed. He looked at the other uncles and asked, "Uncle, how should I address them? This is sixth grade, uncle, this is..." He introduced them one by one, but communication was a little difficult. Few of the older generation were fluent in Mandarin. Most of them spoke half-heartedly. Shinjilia watched them speak. They were basically guessing and guessing. Fortunately, he could still guess a little. Chapter 19:15. After sending the group of uncles off, Shinjilia stood up to see the guests out. After sending the guests off, Yi Zhenhua changed the tea leaves and boiled a pot of water. When he saw Shinjilia enter, he waved at him. "Uncle." Shinjilia sat down and tidied up the tea set that the guests had just drunk from and stacked it together. "Shin," Yi Zhenhua said as he brewed a cup of tea for him, "I've always believed that you and my daughter would get married. I always felt that it was only a matter of time." Shinjilia felt the same way. When he heard that, he looked at Yi Zhenhua seriously and said, "Uncle, I think you're very wise. I'll definitely be responsible for Qianqian." Ever since he got together with Yi Qianqian, he had not only received her first time. He had also received her entire life. Being responsible for her was also being responsible for himself. Yi Zhenhua smiled and said, "I just like talking to you. You're so good at flattering me." Shinjilia was a little embarrassed and smiled shyly. Sometimes Qianqian can be a little willful and immature. As a man, you need to be more tolerant of her. Yi Zhenhua took a sip of tea and said, "Qianqian has never had a mother by her side since she was young. If you have children in the future, I'm afraid that she might not be a good mother. You need to teach her more." Shinjilia blinked. "So, he's going to be a mother?" "Ahem, I'll be rest assured if Qianqian is with you in the future. You're a responsible and sensible young man, but there's one thing I must warn you about." Yi Zhenhua's expression became serious as he said, "If one day you end up with another woman, you must tell our family. It doesn't matter if it's Qianqian or me. If you really have no feelings for Qianqian and don't want to be with her anymore, you must tell me as soon as possible." I won't let Chan stay by your side anymore and she won't pester you anymore. Shenjulia's heart skipped a beat. Of course he knew that. Yi Chan might be with him now, but once she made up her mind, she would never turn back. Shenjulia had experienced such a thing before. Shenjulia would never want to experience this kind of sadness and despair a second time. Did you hear me clearly? Shenjulia nodded his head earnestly. Got it. I'll definitely treat Chan well. Humph. Yi Genoa's expression finally eased up a little. He said, I hope you remember what you said today. If I find out one day that you did something to let Chan down, I'll definitely fly to the capital and smash your head. Shenjulia was amused. Yi Genoa looked at Shenjulia and shouted, I'm not joking. If I say I'm going to blow up your head, I really mean it. Shenjulia was ready for battle and replied, yes. Yi Genoa chatted with Yi Genoa for a while longer. Shenjulia was basically obedient and well-behaved. When he returned to Yi Chan's room, he found her sleeping soundly. He had taken off his cotton-padded jacket, but he didn't cover himself with a blanket. Shenjulia was shocked. He went forward to pull out the blanket from under her and slowly covered her body with it. Yi Chan moaned and stretched. When she looked at Shenjulia, she yawned and asked, have they left? Yes, let's go. Shenjulia sat down beside Yi Chan and said, I just had a chat with your father. Chapter 1916. He warned me that if I didn't treat you well in the future, he would go to the capital and blow my head off. Yi Chan burst out laughing. Shenjulia's face was stern as he said, I'm not joking. He said he would blow your head off and he meant it. Yi Chan laughed even louder as she asked, what? Did my father really say that? Shenjulia looked helpless when he saw Yi Chan's reaction. He nodded his head and said, yes, that's exactly what he said. Yeah, however, Shenjulia moved closer to Yi Chan and said, even if your father didn't warn me, I would still treat you well. If you don't treat me well, I'll leave. Go where? Run away from home. Why would I tell you? Yi Chan wrapped herself in the blanket. If you dare to be mean to me, I'll leave. I'll leave every time I'm mean to you. Let's see if you dare to do it again. Shenjulia smiled and pleaded, I can't afford to offend you. Your words are worse than blowing my head off. Yi Chan looked smug. Shenjulia felt a little emotional and said, how did we end up together? Feels a little magical. When I first saw you, I didn't even notice you. Yi Chan pinched his waist when she heard that. Shenjulia dodged with a smile and continued, but after spending some time together, I realized that you're really interesting. You're much more interesting than you Lily. Well, Lily is about to give birth and you're still thinking about her? Yi Chan's words were obviously sour. Shenjulia pinched her nose and said, how is that possible? I just can't stand the fact that she's so devoted to Ming. There are thousands of good men in the world. Why does she have to be with Ming? I just don't understand, how do you women's hearts grow? Yi Chan kicked him and said, I'm different from Lily. If you treat me the way Ming treats Lily, I'll never look back. Shenjulia looked at Yi Chan with an aggrieved expression. Yi Chan replied earnestly, I'm serious. I won't look back. It's just like you said. It's hard to find a three-legged toad in the world, but aren't two-legged men everywhere? But you'll never find someone like me. Why do I have to be like you? You've already let me down. Why should I look for someone like you? Am I going to let you down again? Yi Chan snapped. I'm not a masochist. When Shenjulia heard that, he realized that it made sense. Chan. Shenjulia's heart was filled with both love and hate. Sometimes I envy Ming. He's such a jerk and such a wretch. How could he have a silly girl like you Lily waiting for him? Maybe he's rich and handsome? I'm also rich and handsome. Shenjulia was indignant. But you're not as rich and handsome as he is. Yi Chan replied matter-of-factly. Shenjulia felt as if his heart had been pierced with 1,000 holes. He weakly retorted, I'm a good man. That's indeed better than him. Don't worry. I won't let you down. Shenjulia hugged her and said, if you really run away, I'll really cry. Yi Chan leaned on his shoulder and smiled. She looked up at Shenjulia. Sometimes she couldn't figure it out. His face was so handsome that it was eye-catching. Chapter 1917. However, Yi Chan wasn't the only one who couldn't figure it out. She wouldn't be able to figure it out for a long time to come. For the past few days, Yi Chan hadn't had a good night's sleep. After chatting with Shenjulia for a while, she drifted off to sleep. In the evening, Shenjulia woke her up for dinner. When she was brushing her teeth and washing her face, She realized that there was a dazzling array of dishes outside. They were all her favorite dishes. After a hearty meal, Yi Zhenhua suddenly had the idea to take them hiking. Cloud Town was not big. There was a famous mountain that the people in the town called Spiritual Mountain. The Spiritual Mountain was called a mountain, but in reality, it was just a slightly higher hill. Because it was the new year, many people came to climb the mountain at night. The mountain was not steep, and some elderly people would come here to climb up and down. Yi Qianshan deliberately changed into a pair of flats, but before she could even get halfway up the mountain, she felt that she was about to give up. Although the mountain was not steep, it was somewhat slippery. There wasn't much concave or convex surface, so if a person was standing on it, they would easily slide down if they weren't careful. Yi Qianshan maintained her posture and didn't dare to move. She looked at her father, who was swaggering above her, and said pitifully, "Dad, I can't move anymore." Yi Zhenhua was obviously full of energy. He turned to look at Yi Qianshan and said with a smile, "You're a young lady, yet you're losing to an old man like me. Hurry up and come up." *T. How are you old? You look very young. Yi Qianshan's face was full of disgust, but she still gave him face and crawled a few more times. He was panting and sweating profusely. Shinjilia was the same. He let out a long sigh and said, "Follow closely. Come, I'll pull you." Yi Qianshan reached out and grabbed Shinjilia's hand before walking forward step by step. Yi Zhenhua saw that they were in a good mood. He sighed and said, "In the past it was always those people who came with their families. I was embarrassed to come alone." "Ah." Yi Zhenhua smiled and looked down. "I haven't been here for a long time. This time I came with my daughter and son-in-law. It's finally comfortable." Yi Qianshan's heart ached when she heard that. She was busy with work and could only go home a few times a year. In the past, when his grandfather was still around, he still had a companion. Now that Grandpa had passed away, Yi Zhenhua was living alone at home. Yi Qianshan was still a little worried. Fortunately, he was in good health, so Yi Qianshan wasn't afraid that he would suddenly fall ill. Panting, Yi Qianshan used his strength to climb up and called out, "Dad, I'll come home on the weekends to keep you company, okay?" "Go, I don't need your company." Yi Zhenhua climbed up the mountain and said while panting, "Kingstown is not close to Yin Town. It's almost a 2-hour drive. It's so tiring to go back and forth." "I'm not tired. Forget it. Work hard and work hard to get promoted. That's the best way to repay me." Yi Zhenhua smiled. "If you get promoted, I'll be able to show off when I introduce my daughter to others in the future. How great would that be?" His voice was a little sweet, but the back view of him climbing the mountain looked a little frail. All alone. Yi Qianshan pursed her lips and almost burst into tears. She bit her lower lip and her eyes reddened. Shinjilia silently tightened his grip on her hand and said, "Hurry up and come up." Chapter 1918. But after thinking about it, she pushed his hand away and said, "Go climb the mountain with my father. I'll do it slowly on my own." "But you're too slow." Shinjilia frowned. "You're crawling like a tortoise. What if you get lost later?" "Impossible." Yi Qianshan glared at him. "Do you think I'm a 3-year-old? The top of the mountain is only so big. How could I possibly get lost? At most I'll make a phone call. There's no signal on my phone." Shinjilia pulled her along and said, "Let's go." Yi Qianshan was silent for a moment before she suddenly shouted, "Dad, old Shin wants to compete with you." Yi Zhenhua turned around and looked over. He was amused and said, "All right, young man, you'll definitely be faster than me. I won't wait for you. Hurry up and catch up or you'll be punished." When Shinjilia heard that, he realized that Yi Zhenhua wasn't the least bit worried that Yi Qianshan would get lost or do anything else. With a smug look on her face, Yi Qianshan pushed his hand away and said, "Go on. My father is waiting for you. Just you wait." Shinjilia had no choice but to turn around and climb up. "I'm coming." Yi Zhenhua's speed was very fast and he disappeared in 2 or 3 moves. Shinjilia wasn't slow either. It was obvious that he had great stamina. Even carrying Yi Qianshan wasn't strenuous at all. Now that they were gone, Yi Qianshan was even less inclined to crawl. He took his time climbing up and rested at the same time. After about 10 minutes he climbed back down again. When he saw Yi Qianshan, Shinjilia had a helpless expression on his face and said, "Saying that you crawl like a tortoise is too much of a compliment." Yi Qianshan looked at him with a smile. She naturally reached out her hand and said, "Hold my hand." Shinjilia was almost defeated by her. He dragged her up slowly. After trying her best to reach the top, Yi Qianshan was exhausted. However, as soon as he arrived, he was stunned by the scenery at the top of the mountain. There were many people on the mountain, but the open space was very big. Yi Qianshan looked down. All she could see were beautiful red lanterns and the deep blue sky in the distance that was tinged with pink. Below them were dark blue waves. It seemed to be the sea, but it also seemed to be something else. It was beautiful. However, there was a faint green light that was even more breathtakingly beautiful. Green light? Shinjilia also looked over, and his eyes were filled with amazement. Yi Qianshan suddenly recalled a rumor and said, "It said that if you see the green light and make a wish in time, your wish will definitely come true." With that, Yi Qianshan clasped her hands together tightly and closed her eyes. Her heart was filled with devotion. "I hope my father will be healthy and live to a ripe old age." Shinjilia glanced at her before looking at the beam of light not far away. The corners of his lips curled up slightly. Closing his eyes, Shinjilia had a wish. "I hope everything goes well." Almost at the same time, both of them opened their eyes. The green light in the distance had already faded away. Yi Qianshan's lips curled into a smile as she turned her head away. Shinjilia also looked over. The two of them looked at each other and smiled. The 7th day of the new year was a special day for Cloud Town. On this day it was like a small festival. Receiving guests, paying respects to the ancestors and worshipping the gods were all suitable. Shinjilia and Yi Qianshan had prepared their gifts early in the morning and went to the famous house in town. Uncle Blind's house was full of people today. Chapter 1919. They brought all kinds of expensive gifts with them and lined up outside sincerely, hoping that the blind uncle would have his fortune read for them. Shinjilia was shocked when he saw it. "Why are there so many people?" Yi Qianshan glanced at them, then glanced at Shinjilia with contempt and said, "Look at how inexperienced you are. Of course it's because the blind uncle is accurate." Shinjilia had never expected that the blind uncle's appeal would be so much stronger than old Mrs. Shen's. That was true. One was a true immortal and the other was a demigod. That must be the difference, right? Shinjilia and Yi Qianshan waited outside for a long time. When the line of people dwindled, they finally walked in. As soon as they entered, Shinjilia saw the obviously worn floor tiles and exclaimed, "I finally know what it means to have the doors broken. In ancient times, wooden houses must have been even worse than this." "You're ignorant." Yi Qianshan glanced at him and said, "Don't you see the doors ill?" "I see it." The floor tiles looked very dirty and there were even some wear and tear on them. However, the color of the doorsill was very even. "I don't know what it's like over there, but here doorsills can't be stepped on." "Huh? What? I don't really understand. Grandpa told me before that the doorsill is like the neck of a deity. If you step on the doorsill, it's like you're stepping on the neck of a deity. It's not good." Shinjilia had never heard of it before. Now that Yi Qianshan said it, he found it a little novel. Carrying her gifts, she went to find the blind uncle. It was obvious that the blind uncle had been busy the whole day and was very tired. He was sitting in a chair and leaning against it. His eyes were open, but there were no pupils in them. They were just white. Yi Qianshan felt a little scared when she saw him. When she saw the blind uncle's exhausted look, Yi Qianshan hesitated for a moment and said, "Why don't we come back tomorrow?" "Ah, you're here." It was a woman's voice. It was a woman who looked to be in her 40s or 50s. She looked like an auntie hired by the people in town to take care of the blind uncle. She walked over and asked, "Are you Yi Genoa's daughter?" Yi Qianshan was a little surprised and asked, "Yeah, how did you know?" The old maid did not answer but looked at the blind uncle. Uncle Blind still had the same expression, but this time he spoke in a dialect, "Since you're here, come in." She didn't know why, but she had a feeling that he was waiting for her to come. She pulled Shinjilia forward and stood in front of the blind man. She greeted him, "Hello, uncle." Uncle Blind finally propped himself up and said, "Young lad, come." As he spoke, he waved to the front. He spoke in a dialect, so Shinjilia couldn't understand him. Yi Qianshan nudged him and said, "Uncle is calling for you." Shinjilia placed the gift on the table beside him and stepped forward. "Squat down," Uncle Blind said. Yi Qianshan translated and Shinjilia squatted down. Uncle Blind Man's rough hand touched Shinjilia's face. Shinjilia quickly closed his eyes. His face hurt from the rubbing. But he didn't make a sound. He pursed his lips and closed his eyes. In next to no time, the blind uncle withdrew his hand and said, "Not bad, not bad." Shinjilia understood what she was trying to say. Chapter 1920. Yi Qianshan tugged at him. Shinjilia finally stood up. He felt a little strange. "Lass." The blind uncle's voice sounded like wood rubbing against cement. It was dry, hoarse, and unpleasant to the ears. Yi Qianshan replied, "Yes." "You want to get married?" Yi Chanshan felt goosebumps all over her body. She whispered, "How did you know?" The blind uncle smiled and said, "Don't be nervous. It's fine. I won't harm you." "I know." Yi Chanshan smiled awkwardly. But she was still afraid. "Give me your boyfriend's horoscope." Shinjilia's horoscope? She only knew Shinjilia's date of birth, but she didn't know the hour of his birth. She turned to look at Shinjilia and asked, "When were you born?" "Noon." "Ah, then it's noon." Yi Chanshan quickly reported Shinjilia's horoscope and her own horoscope. Uncle Blind nodded with a serious look on his face. He pinched the fingers of his right hand as if he was calculating something. "It's the 5th day of the 3rd lunar month this year. It's the best day to get married." Yi Chanshan was a little surprised. She squatted down and said, "Uncle, you said that I would face a tribulation when I was 28 years old. Will I still face one now that I'm 28 years old?" When the blind uncle heard this, he chuckled but did not answer directly. Instead he said, "That depends on your fate and your man's fate." "What does that mean?" Yi Chanshan didn't understand. However, she was a little unwilling, so she asked again, "Can I still have children?" "Fate." Yi Chanshan felt a little defeated. She stood up and frowned. When the old woman next to her saw Yi Chanshan's expression, she said, "Don't be afraid. There is always a solution to any disaster." "Sir, there should be a solution, right? The little girl has brought you a lot of tonics. Her father and grandfather are also very good people. Their ancestors have accumulated good karma." Uncle Blind Man only smiled and said nothing. If there was no sound, then it was the worst sound. Yi Chanshan felt that her bad habit of letting her imagination run wild was about to resurface. She stomped her feet anxiously and looked at Shinjilia. Shinjilia felt like he was listening to a book from heaven. When he saw Yi Chanshan's expression, he asked softly, "What's wrong?" Yi Chanshan's eyes reddened and she asked, "What do you think I'll do if I can't have children in the future?" When Shinjilia heard this, he thought that the blind uncle had said something despairing to her. He felt a little sad, but he looked at Yi Chanshan and enunciated each word clearly, "It doesn't matter. My family doesn't have a throne to inherit. Why would I want a child? As long as we're alive and happy, that's all that matters." Yi Chanshan wanted to cry even more. She asked, "But don't you really want a child?" "Nope, who told you that?" Shinjilia looked aggrieved and replied, "When did I say that?" "Sai, don't let your imagination run wild. If it's not, then it's not. What's important is that we're together." Yi Chanshan couldn't help but tear up. He had clearly said that. In the imperial capital, in the hotel. He told her very clearly that he wanted a child. However, it was very likely that she wouldn't be able to give birth now. What should she do? Besides, it's not up to them to decide whether we can have children or not. We can go to the hospital for a checkup. As long as there's nothing wrong with our bodies, we can definitely have children. Chapter 1921. Yi Chanshan looked at him with reddened eyes and asked, "You really don't believe me?" "Well, this is the era of science. Why do you believe so much nonsense?" Shinjilia placed his hand on her shoulder to comfort her. She didn't know if the blind man understood or not, but after Shinjilia finished speaking, he laughed and said, "I didn't say anything." Yi Chanshan's mood, which had been on the brink of collapse, seemed to have returned to normal when she heard his laugh. Looking at the blind man, Yi Chanshan asked, "Uncle? Fate?" The blind man still used the same words. Yi Chanshan was even more uncertain. However, no matter how much she asked or said, the blind man refused to reveal a single word. The servant next to her couldn't stand it anymore and said, "If the master is willing to say it, then let him say it. If he doesn't want to say it, then he must have his reasons. Young lady, don't ask any more." Although Yi Chanshan was unwilling, she could only give up. In fact, she just wanted to feel at ease. After leaving the blind man's place, when Yi Chanshan and Shinjilia returned home, Yi Zhenhua had already prepared dinner. When he saw them return, he brought out the last dish and said, "Tong Tong just came by." Yi Chanshan was stunned when she heard that. Shinjilia asked, "What did she come for?" "She came to look for you. She asked you to go to her shop after dinner if you have time." It was the Lunar New Year period, and many young people had returned home to celebrate the holiday. Fang Tongtong's shop was very popular, so she naturally couldn't leave. Yi Chanshan understood and nodded her head. "Okay, I got it." Shinjilia went to the kitchen to wash his hands and took out the bowls and chopsticks. He glanced at Yi Chanshan and asked, "Are you really going?" "Yes, I'll go. I'll go alone. You can stay at home." Yi Chanshan looked at him. Shinjilia frowned and said, "No way. Didn't something happen to her when she left your house?" I'll go with you later. Yi Qianshan felt a little helpless. It's fine. I'll take the main road. There are people coming and going on the main road. What's there to be afraid of? No, Shinjilia refused again. I'll go with you. All right. Yi Qianshan didn't know what to do with him and said, I just think it'll be awkward if we go together. Why is it awkward? Shinjilia asked. He suddenly remembered something and said, by the way, we're getting married. Not this. The last time you broke up with me I gave Fang Tongtong a call. Shinjilia scooped rice for everyone in the house before finally sitting down. Yi Qianshan blinked. She felt a little strange. What did he mean by breaking up with him? If she hadn't misunderstood his relationship with Fang Tongtong, would she have broken up with him? But he didn't mention it and asked, and then? Then I think I said some nasty things. If I go it might be a little awkward. Shinjilia picked up his chopsticks and picked up some food for Yi Qianshan. Let's eat. Yi Qianshan stared at the food in her bowl and asked suspiciously, what did you say? Based on Shinjilia's character, what kind of harsh words could he say? Chapter 1922. Yi Qianshan replied, that's pretty harsh. However, Shinjilia's character wasn't bad. How angry must he be to say something like that? Yi Qianshan glanced at Shinjilia guiltily and lowered her head to eat in silence. As Shinjilia ate, he said, in any case, I don't have a good impression of her anymore. If she wasn't your best friend, I would have chased her away a long time ago. As he spoke, he looked at Yi Qianshan with a hint of resentment and said, look at you. You invited a wolf into the house and wronged me. I'll remember this for the rest of my life. Yi Qianshan felt even more guilty. She looked up at Shinjilia weakly. Shinjilia looked very unhappy. Even his eating speed had slowed down significantly. When Yi Qianshan saw this, she muttered, you're a man. Why are you so petty? Shinjilia was even more unhappy. All right. Yi Qianshan reached out and tugged at his hand. I was wrong, all right? Didn't I admit my mistake later on? Look at how well I'm doing now. I'm like a fairy. Yi Zhenhua laughed out loud and looked at Yi Qianshan with disdain. As he ate, he complained, you're so thick-skinned. Yi Qianshan stuck out her tongue and looked at Shinjilia pitifully. Shinjilia wasn't really angry. When he saw Yi Qianshan's expression, his expression relaxed a little. He said, I got it. It's all in the past. Yi Qianshan breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, hubby is the best. Hubby? An unformed marriage. Shinjilia suddenly felt a little intoxicated when he heard those two words. His mood lightened up, but he still kept a straight face and coldly replied. Yi Qianshan had long seen through his thoughts. She laughed and lowered her head to eat. After dinner, Shinjilia escorted Yi Qianshan to the back of the big banyan tree in front of Fang Tongtong's snack shop. He specially reminded her, when you're ready to go back, you must send me a message or call me. I'll pick you up. Don't come back alone. Got it? Yi Qianshan pushed him away. Go back and wash the dishes. Shinjilia had no choice but to turn back 3 times as he walked away. Yi Qianshan walked past the big banyan tree and arrived at Fang Tongtong's door. The sound was very good and there were many young people coming and going. There were a few motorcycles parked at the entrance. Young men and women were smoking on the motorcycles, talking and laughing. Fashionable and youthful. Yi Qianshan walked over. The men glanced at her and quickly shifted their attention. Fang Tongtong, who was sitting inside, kept her gaze fixed on Yi Qianshan. Fang Tongtong waited until Yi Qianshan was right in front of her before she smiled and said, You're here. Yes, I'm coming. Mom? Fang Tongtong called out and walked inside. Qianshan, you're here. Come and take care of the shop. Okay. Mrs. Fang's voice wasn't soft either and it reached outside. Soon Mrs. Fang came out. When he saw Yi Qianshan, he seemed a little touched and said, You're here, Qianshan. Come in and have a seat. I'll take care of things here. Fang Tongtong naturally held Yi Qianshan's hand and said, Let's go. I brought you a present. Yi Qianshan subconsciously looked at her hand, which was being held by Shinjilia. She felt a little strange. Fang Tongtong noticed Yi Qianshan's gaze and smiled awkwardly. She quickly let go of her hand and said, Come. Yi Qianshan followed her inside. The familiar layout didn't seem to have changed much over the years. Chapter 1923. Actually, Fang Tongtong's home wasn't here. Instead, it was in the small villa behind. After so many years, the family had been quite well off. However, he spent almost all of his time in this small restaurant, so it naturally became his second home. Inside there was a sofa, tea set, tables and chairs. After Fang Tongtong walked in, she took out a bag. It looked like a jewelry wrapper. Here, this is for you. Fang Tong Tong sat down on a stool. What would you like to drink? I recently learned how to brew coffee. Do you want a cup? Yi Chanshan sat down and naturally opened the gift bag in her hand. She said, No, I won't be able to sleep later. It's been a few days and I still need to rest. Are you not feeling well? No. Yi Chanshan opened the package and said, If you want to have a child, you'll have to go to the hospital for a checkup. Fang Tong Tong suddenly felt a little sad when she heard that. He looked at Yi Chanshan and asked, Are you married? Not yet. Yi Chanshan glanced at her. If I were to get married, wouldn't you know? I still have a wedding to attend. Fang Tong Tong calmed down. She looked at Yi Yu's hand and said anxiously, Can you do it or not? You've been tearing it apart for so long but you still can't open it. Let me do it. No. Yi Chanshan turned around and avoided her lecherous hand. Can't you show some sincerity? You're just giving me a present, and you're complaining that I'm taking too long to open it. That's weird. Fang Tong Tong couldn't help but laugh when she heard Yi Chanshan's words of disdain. Yi Chanshan glanced at her and muttered, Crazy. You're the crazy one. I'm not talking about you. Why do you have to take it personally? Bah, there are only the two of us here. If you don't scold me, why are you scolding the air? I'll just curse at the air. I'm happy to. Yi Chanshan said matter-of-factly. Finally, the packaging was removed. It was indeed a jewelry box. Yi Chanshan opened the box and saw a ruby. The ruby was not small and was made into the shape of a key. There were many diamonds on the key. Yi Chanshan was stunned when she saw it. She looked up at Fang Tong Tong and said, You've struck it rich. Why did you give her such an expensive gift? Do you want to die? I didn't get rich. Fang Tong Tong's smile faded. I just wanted to apologize to you. Apologize? Yi Chanshan looked at the extravagant necklace. The necklace would cost at least tens of thousands of yuan, right? Or even more expensive? Yes. Fang Tong Tong looked at Yi Chanshan and said, I'm sorry about what happened before, Chanshan. Yi Chanshan didn't respond. She stared at the necklace in her hand and nodded her head in satisfaction. She said, Your apology is very sincere. I like it. Of course it's enough. I bought this necklace with all my savings over the years. Fang Tong Tong had a pained expression on her face. Damn it. I can't even bear to buy something so expensive myself. Yi Chanshan closed the lid and looked at Fang Tong Tong earnestly. She said, Don't worry. I'll treat her well. Fang Tong Tong glared at her, but she quickly smiled. Yi Chanshan looked at her and smiled. She quickly changed the topic. She had originally thought that it would be awkward to meet Fang Tong Tong here. Later on, she realized that no matter what happened, their relationship of more than 10 years was still a relationship. Chapter 1924. Things seemed to be going smoothly. On the night they returned to Kingstown, old Mrs. Shun called Shinjilia. She looked very happy and said, I've decided on the wedding day. It's on the 5th day of the 3rd month in spring. This is the best day of the year. According to Chanshan's horoscope, it's especially good. When Shinjilia and Yi Chanshan heard the old man's happy words, they looked at each other and smiled. The date that old Mrs. Shin mentioned was the same as the date that Uncle Blind had told them 2 days ago. On the same day. Okay, got it. Shinjilia replied. On the other hand, old Mrs. Shun was displeased. She said, What do you mean I know? Aren't you happy that we're getting married so soon? Shinjilia naturally wouldn't tell her about the blind uncle. Instead, he changed the topic and asked, Grandma, since you said that it was a good day, how was it a good day? Chanshan, the right time and the right place are all favorable to you. Your 8 characters of the 8 trigrams can also set off Chanshan. If you get married on this day, maybe you will have a change of luck. Shinjilia turned on the loudspeaker. Yi Chanshan's eyes lit up when she heard that. What does that mean? What? Yi Chanshan suddenly felt a glimmer of hope. The word that the blind uncle had repeated countless times appeared in his mind. Fate. If his luck changed at this time, it could also be considered fate, right? Yi Chanshan's mood suddenly lightened up. Really? Shinjilia was ecstatic. Grandma, you're the best. When old Mrs. Shin heard that, she smiled proudly and said, I'm just kidding. Of course I'm great. All right. On the 25th of next month, bring Chanshan back to collect the marriage certificate. Gregorian calendar? Yes, the Gregorian calendar. Shinjilia instinctively walked over to the desk calendar and flipped through it. There's still a month left, he said. That's right. That's not a bad day either. It's the perfect day to get our marriage certificate. old Mrs. Shin said with a smile. I can't talk to you anymore. I'm going to talk to Dongfang. Wait, Grandma. Before he could finish, old Mrs. Shen had already hung up. Shenjilia had no other choice, but when he turned around, a figure pounced on him. Yi Qianshan jumped up and laughed happily. We're getting married. Shenjilia held her firmly in his arms. Yi Qianshan was even more excited. She clasped him and shouted, We're getting married. We're getting married. Old Shin, we can get our marriage certificate next month. Shenjilia carried her back into the room and said, Didn't you say that you didn't care about this ID? How did you change so quickly? Ah. Yi Qianshan hugged his head and looked up happily. How could I not care? You big idiot. Didn't I comfort you at that time? Shenjilia placed her on the bed, but Yi Qianshan refused to let go of him. His mind was happily fantasizing about his future life. Shenjilia's face reddened and he said with much difficulty, Let go. Are you trying to murder your husband? Ah. Yi Qianshan released him and kicked off her shoes. She took off her jacket and laid on the bed with her phone in her hand. She opened the browser. Shenjilia removed his jacket and pinned her down from behind as he asked, What are you doing? Yi Qianshan stared at the phone and asked, Let me check what we need to prepare for our wedding. Are we going to do a premarital checkup? Yeah. We'll do it tomorrow. Shenjilia hugged her from behind. His hand slid under her shirt, and his other hand took away her phone. There's no rush. Leave the checkup to me. Yi Qianshan turned her head, and Shenjilia quickly covered her lips with his. Chapter 1925. On her first day back at work, Yi Qianshan applied for leave. Although the chief editor wasn't happy, when she heard that she was going for a premarital checkup, she didn't object. Yi Qianshan and Shenjilia arrived at the hospital early. After registering, they went straight for the checkup. After a series of tests, Yi Qianshan was very nervous. They couldn't get the report right away, so Shenjilia and Yi Qianshan went home after the checkup. After staying in Kingstown for 2 days, Shenjilia returned to the capital. Yi Qianshan went to work alone. She insisted on going to bed early and waking up early every day. She didn't know if it was an illusion, but she found that her skin looked much better. When she got the report, Yi Qianshan immediately took it out. However, she wasn't in a hurry to read it. Instead, she called Shenjilia. Shenjilia seemed to be busy. It took a long time for him to pick up. It was very quiet on the other end. Shenjilia said softly, Give me 10 minutes. Okay. Yi Qianshan immediately hung up. She stared at the report in front of her and took a deep breath before flipping it open. She read through everything. Everything was normal. Negative. Normal. Yi Qianshan read it over and over again. Her original nervousness disappeared. She took photos of every page and sent them to Shenjilia's phone. After about 5 minutes, Shenjilia called back. Yi Qianshan picked up and said excitedly, I got the report. I saw it. Shenjilia seemed to be in a good mood. He said, All the tests are normal. There's nothing different. Ah. Does it prove that my body is healthy? Yeah. Did you get the report on the uterus that day? Yeah. I sent it to you. Yeah. Shenjilia smiled sincerely and said, Everything is normal. Everything is normal. You're healthy. Yi Qianshan fell into the chair. She laughed excitedly and said, Old Shen, I miss you so much. I miss you too. Shenjilia looked at the calendar. So, remember to bring your household register and ID card. We're going to the Civil Affairs Bureau. Oh my, old Shen is getting married? A colleague next to him overheard and immediately began to tease him. Yi Qianshan heard it too. She didn't mind and said, Tell your colleague that there will be wedding candies. Shenjilia smiled. He glanced at the man and said, Don't worry. You'll get plenty of red packets. Yi Qianshan burst out laughing and said, Go ahead. I have to get back to work. Wait for me. Phew, sure, Shenjilia replied. He only put down the phone after Yi Qianshan hung up. He turned around and continued to busy himself. Yushio. The new year had just ended, and the surroundings were still immersed in the festive atmosphere. Su Qinsi helped Nanny Rong make desserts for the children. Standing next to the stove, she slowly stirred the sugar in the pan. The small fire simmered slowly, and the fragrance permeated the air. Li Jianyue ran around with little Su and shouted in a crisp voice, Mommy, little Su smelled the fragrance too. She's so happy. Su Qinsi smiled and was about to speak, but suddenly she felt a pain in her belly. The pain came suddenly. She frowned and slightly bent down. Nanny Rong saw this and asked in surprise, Madam, what's wrong? Su Qinsi's face quickly paled. My stomach hurts. Nanny Rong was even more shocked. She quickly turned off the fire and supported her. Are you going to give birth? Come, sit on the sofa. Chapter 1926. Hearing Ursu's words, Nanny Rong frowned and said, It's not as simple as a stomachache. Hurry up and call your father. Li Jianyue had never seen Nanny Rong so serious before. She was shocked and said, Oh, I'll go right now. Su Qianxi's situation looked bad. Her waist was slightly arched and her belly was bulging. Her face looked a little pale and she was holding a spoon in her hand. Nanny Rong took the spoon from Su Qianxi's hand and put it down. Then she helped Su Qianxi to sit on the sofa. Su Qianxi's belly was swollen and painful, and she held it uncomfortably. Nanny Rong knew that she was really going to give birth. She looked at Ursu and saw that she was calling Li Xiqing. Li Xiqing quickly picked up. Ursu turned on the speaker and said in a crisp voice, Hello, Dad, Nanny Rong asked me to call you. She said that Mom has a stomachache. Li Xiqing was preparing for the meeting. When he heard this, he was stunned and said, Your mother has a stomachache? Yes. Ask Nanny Rong if Mom is going to give birth. Yes, yes, yes. Nanny Rong couldn't stand it anymore and shouted, Sir, come back quickly. Madam looks very uncomfortable. Come back quickly and take her to the hospital. In the president's office of the LS Group, Qing Yu walked in with the meeting materials and knocked on the door. Li Xiqing had just hung up the phone, and then he picked up his coat and said, The meeting is postponed. Qing Yu was stunned and asked, Why? My wife is giving birth. Almost flying out, Li Xiqing soon disappeared. Qing Yu was surprised and said, Susu is going to give birth again? She picked up her phone and called Rong Rue. After all, he was Su Qianxi's cousin, so it was necessary to inform him. She went to the conference room to inform them of the situation. Everyone expressed their blessings and then left. When Li Xiqing returned home, he ran in. Seeing Su Qianxi leaning on the sofa, he said, Honey, I'm back. Su Qianxi glanced at Li Xiqing and said with some grievance, Mr. Li, it hurts? Li Xiqing quickly walked forward, pushed Nanny Rong aside, and then went forward to carry Su Qianxi. Nanny Rong, take Ursu with you. Mosen is still inside. Nanny Rong hesitated. However, Ursu looked excited and said, Is Mommy going to give birth to a little brother? She's a little girl. He corrected her and quickly carried her out. Opening the car door, Li Xiqing thought for a moment and said, Ursu, you stay at home with Granny Rong and Xiao Su. I'll take your mother to the hospital. Li Jianyue looked a little disappointed, but she still pouted and said, All right then. Daddy has to take good care of Mommy. Of course. Li Xiqing touched his daughter's head and said, Daddy is leaving. Su Qianxi's face was pale, which made Li Xiqing feel sorry for her. He started the car and drove straight in the direction of the first maternity hospital. When she arrived at the hospital, she looked much better. He got out of the car and hugged her. Does it still hurt? Su Qianxi shook her head and said, It's not that painful. Chapter 1927. The pain of a pregnant woman was sometimes heavy and sometimes light. Just lying on the bed, Su Qianxi felt an unbearable swelling pain again. It was the first time that Li Xiqing had seen her give birth so closely. His lips tightened in fear and he said, Doctor, hurry up. My wife has a stomachache. The nurse was a bit speechless, but she still said in a good attitude, That's what women do when they give birth. They'll be fine after they give birth. When can she give birth? I don't know yet. Her water hasn't broken yet. I guess it'll take a while. How long? Li Xiqing was a bit loud. The nurse looked at Li Xiqing and said, Mr. Li, it depends on the pregnant woman. It's not up to us to decide. Some people have to give birth for a few days, but others have to give birth immediately. Give birth immediately? A cesarean section? A cesarean section is also an option, but I recommend you to have a natural birth. After all, your wife had a cesarean section before, and they also gave birth here. Therefore the nurse was very clear. When Su Qianxi gave birth for the first time, this man was not by her side at all. The way she looked at Li Xiqing was also a bit strange. Li Xiqing nodded as if he was thinking. Su Qianxi was lying on the bed looking very pale. Mr. Li, please stay here with your wife. If anything happens, just press the service bell. What do you mean? The nurse held back her laughter and said, For example, the pregnant woman can't stand the pain or her water breaks or any other emergency. You can go out. Su Qianxi's voice rang out. Let my husband stay here. The nurse felt relieved and said, Okay, call me if anything happens. After the nurse left, Li Xiqing sat on the edge of Su Qianxi's bed. Su Qianxi looked at her husband, feeling both amused and distressed. She reached out and touched his face. His first child was already absent. This time he was nervous and flustered, and Su Qianxi saw all of it. "Don't be nervous. It's not that painful," she comforted him. Li Xiqing suddenly laughed. "Why are you comforting me now?" Su Qianxi's face was pale, but she was in good spirits. "Look at yourself. Can you comfort me now?" Li Xiqing caught her hand and kissed it gently. "Don't I look bad now?" Su Qianxi smiled and said, "No, my husband is always the most handsome." Li Xiqing curled his lips and looked at her belly. His stomach looked round. It was huge. However, compared to the first twin, it was undoubtedly much smaller. "Bite me if it hurts." He looked at her with concern. "Your lips are blue." "Of course not. It's over if my lips turn blue." Su Qianxi's mental state was not bad, but suddenly, it began to hurt again. Don't talk. Save your energy." He held her hand and sat next to her. Su Qianxi's heart was warm. At least this time he was by her side. After another 2 hours of pain, Su Qianxi's water broke, and the doctors and nurses sent her to the delivery room. After a series of procedures and disinfection, Li Xiqing could enter the delivery room. Chapter 1928. At that moment, Li Xiqing's mind was blank. But at the same time he felt that his life was complete. It was as if he could feel every inch of Su Qianxi's pain. But it was so far away, and he wished that he could replace her and let all the pain fall on himself. She did not give birth until it was very, very late in the evening. It was a natural birth. Su Qianxi's face was pale and relaxed, but Li Xiqing felt that he had been tortured to the core. Holding Su Qianxi's hand, Li Xiqing did not speak for a long time. "Hubby." "Yeah. I'm hungry." She sounded aggrieved and faint. Li Xiqing suddenly smiled when he heard that. "Nanny Rong is here." Li Xiao and Qin Shuhua were waiting at the door of the delivery room. Nanny Rong sat with Mosen and Daisu until the door of the delivery room opened. Almost at the same time, everyone stood up and carried a chubby boy. "It's a boy 6 and 2 pounds. Great." Qin Shuhua laughed excitedly. She went forward and carefully carried the child over. "How is the adult?" Li Xiao asked. "Is my son in there too?" "Yes, but he's about to be transferred to another ward. He'll be out soon." The nurse smiled and reminded them of the precautions. Li Xiao actually did not understand these things, but Qin Shuhua nodded. Mosen turned his head and looked at Ursu. He said, "Mommy gave birth to a little brother." "Yeah, I heard that. Is the brother called Sansu?" Qin Shuhua laughed and said, "He's called Little Moyun." "Little Moyun, Big Mosen." "Yeah." Li Jianyue cheered and took out her little phone. "I'm going to call brother. If he hears this good news, he'll be very happy." Nanny Rong looked at the children and said with a smile, "By the way, tell your grandparents not to worry. Both mother and child are safe." "Yeah." Li Jianyue made the call happily, feeling that she had been entrusted with an important task. She called Li Jianxian and he picked up very quickly. "Brother." A crisp voice sounded. When Li Jianxian heard that, his originally unhappy face softened a little. He said, "Yeah. Brother, let me tell you, Mom gave birth to a little brother today. Grandma said his name is Little Moyun, and Brother Mosen is Big Mosen." Li Jianyue smiled and asked, "Brother, what are you doing?" However, Li Jianxian didn't reply. Instead, he quickly changed the topic and said, "Little Moyun is born. Have you told Grandpa and Grandma?" "No, brother. I miss you so much." Li Jianyue pouted. "Brother, when are you coming back?" Li Jianxian lay on the small bed and looked at the photo not far away. He whispered, "I just came from Kingstown." "Then Big Brother, when are you coming back?" "Wait for the holidays." "Then Big Brother, when are you going to have a holiday?" "Let's wait for brother to graduate." Li Jianxian looked at his little desk, which was filled with all kinds of junior high school textbooks and questions. "I want to go back and see Little Moyun too. I didn't see it either." "I'll go and take a photo of Little Moyun and send it to you." "All right. Just you wait." Li Jianxian removed the phone from his ear and ran towards Qin Shuhua. "Grandma, I want to take a photo of the little brother and send it to brother." Looking at Li Jianyue's expression, Li Mosen suddenly thought of a phrase, "two innocent children." Ursu and Daisu's relationship was too close, and the time they spent together couldn't compare to the strong familial love between them. Chapter 1929. Qin Shuhua helped Li Jianyue take a few photos of Little Moyun's face and then handed the phone to Li Jianyue. Li Jianyue happily sent the photos over and then used WeChat to send a voice message to her brother. Brother, I think little Moyun doesn't look like us at all. We look much better. Li Jianxian didn't reply. In the capital. Li Jianxian looked at the ceiling above his head and was slightly distracted. Even when the phone next to him rang, he ignored it. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. Li Jianxian immediately sat up and became alert. Come in. As soon as the childish voice fell, the sound of the door being opened was heard. Rong Xin walked in and looked at Li Jianxian before closing the door. Hello, Grandma. This. Rong Xin walked over and sat down on Li Jianxian's little bed. Li Jianxian's lips were tightly pursed. I'm sorry, Grandma. Rong Xin looked at the child and sighed. Your mother gave birth today. It's a little brother, so I didn't tell your father about you. However, you really shouldn't have hit your classmate like that. I was wrong. Li Jianxian lowered his head and was very honest. You are different from Chu. Chu's parents have always been abroad and don't care about him. I know that you are close to him, but I think it's better for you to keep a distance from him. Rong Xin looked at Li Jianxian and said seriously. When Li Jianxian heard this, he looked up and looked at her in surprise. Grandma, we hit him today because Wang Xingbin came to provoke us. Li Jianxian's little face was a little unconvinced. He said that Chu was an unwanted child and that I was a little monster raised by an old witch. After we hit him, he even spat on us. I was very angry, So, you hit your classmate until his teeth fell out and his face was swollen. He might even have a concussion. Rong Xin was a little angry. Li Jianxian, what did Grandma usually teach you? A gentleman uses his fists, not his mouth. Not only did you hit him, but you also hit him until he was hospitalized. As she spoke, she looked at Li Jianxian with some disappointment and said, You weren't like this in the past, Daisu. It's all because of Yu Chulin. Grandma, no. Yu Chulin used to have violent tendencies. He looks quiet, but he's actually mentally deficient. His father has mania, so it's best if you don't hang out with him anymore. Li Jianxian couldn't believe that Rong Xin would say such a thing. Grandma? Okay, don't talk about it anymore. Come with me to the hospital tomorrow to apologize to her. Rong Xin stood up and looked at him. If a fool is scolding you, just ignore him. Treat him as a mute, treat him as a lunatic. It's his family's problem if he's not educated, but if you hit him, it's your fault. Li Jianxian was not convinced. He pursed his lips and did not speak. Rong Xin bent down and put her hands on Li Jianxian's shoulders. Daisu, you are still Grandma's good boy. Go to bed early. Good night. Chapter 1930. Daisu, it's because you're friends with him that you chose to believe him. Rong Xin looked at Li Jianxian and said, I know you won't listen to anything I say now, but Grandma has to warn you. Don't contact him anymore. Do you hear me? Grandma, I don't agree. Calm down first. School will start in a few days. You have to prepare well. Grandma, I want to skip a grade. You have to talk to your father about this. Rong Xin looked at Li Jianxian and said, Go to sleep. Good night. The door to the room was closed. Li Jianxian looked at the dark surroundings and suddenly felt a little sad. Mom, I want to go home. Li Xiqing carried the child until late at night. The newborn's body was as soft as a piece of cotton. He held it carefully, afraid that he would hurt the child. Qin Shuhua watched from the side, and her heart was in her throat. She said, Slow down. Slow down. Li Xiqing was already nervous, and after hearing Qin Shuhua's reminder, he felt even more uncomfortable. Su Qianxi had fallen asleep, but when she heard the movement in front of the bed, she woke up again. Seeing that Li Xiqing didn't dare to move, she smiled and said, Don't be afraid. Her voice was very soft. Li Xiqing quickly came over and smiled at Su Qianxi. Then the child in his arms began to struggle. His little hands and feet flailed and his wrinkled face turned slightly red. Then he opened his mouth and burst into tears. Li Xiqing's body stiffened and he asked, Why are you crying? Are you hungry? Qin Shuhua heard that and said, Hurry up and carry the child to Qianqian. Feed him. Okay. Li Xiqing carefully carried the child over and said, Honey, feed him. Su Qianxi slowly sat up, and Qin Shuhua went up to help her. Li Xiqing handed the child to her. When Su Qianxi took it, she could clearly feel the man's hand tremble slightly. Don't be afraid. The child is very strong. But this adult had scared the hell out of him. After feeding the child milk, little Moyun instinctively sucked on the milk and closed his eyes in satisfaction. But after a while he began to cry again. Su Qianxi touched his diaper and found that it felt a little wrong. She said, Does the baby need to change his diaper? Take a look. Li Xiqing hurried forward to hold her and said, "Ah, diaper change, Mom." Qin Shuhua had just walked out to coax her granddaughter. Hearing his voice, she immediately responded, "What's up? Please tell me to change my diaper." Qin Shuhua almost laughed and said, "Wait a minute." Li Jianyue walked forward and stared at him with her big round eyes. "Daddy, are you going to change little brother's diaper?" "Yes, Ursu, go out first. It will stink." Li Jianyue's eyes were wide open, but her eyelids were starting to drool. She said, "I'm not afraid of the stench. I want to take a video and send it to my brother. It's a video of Daddy changing my little brother's diaper." Li Xiqing's expression changed. He coughed softly and said, "What's there to see? Don't take pictures, Mosen." Li Mosen responded from outside, "Take your sister out. Let Granny Rong take you home to sleep. It's getting late." Chapter 1931. Li Jianyue's innocent and cute words made the adults around them laugh. Li Xiqing deliberately put on a straight face and said, "What nonsense are you talking about? Don't be rude." However, Li Jianyue wasn't afraid at all. She was grinning from ear to ear. Li Mosen pulled Li Jianyue and said, "Ursu, let's go back first. Daddy has to take care of Mommy and little brother here. Let's go back and play with little Su." Nanny Rong also came up and said, "Ursu, let's go. Don't make trouble here." Li Jianyue was a little reluctant, but she still pouted and said, "Okay, then when will Daddy and Mommy come home?" "Nanny Rong, why don't you stay here and teach Xiqing? Mom, you can bring the children directly back to the old mansion." Su Qianxi's voice was soft as she looked at Qin Shuhua. "Yes, Mom, I think so too." Qin Shuhua heard that and nodded. "Okay, in that case Nanny Rong can stay here. I'll bring the two children back first." After the discussion, the place was much quieter. Nanny Rong smiled and looked at Li Xiqing. "The children's skin is more tender. Be gentle." Li Xiqing's movements were very gentle. When he heard Nanny Rong's words, he didn't dare to use any force. Nanny Rong couldn't stand watching him being so careful. She said, "Let me do it. Watch me. You'll be able to learn it next time." There was a training center for parents before, but Li Xiqing was busy with work and it wasn't his first child, so he hadn't been there. One reason was that he didn't have time to come again, and the other was that he was embarrassed. Nanny Rong's movements were very smooth and looked gentle and fast. Li Xiqing watched carefully. Su Qianxi looked at her man and her eyes softened. When Li Jianxian and Li Jianyue spoke, Li Xiqing was not by her side. Although he didn't say it, Su Qianxi knew that he must be very regretful. This time, the harder he tried to make it up to her, the more Su Qianxi felt guilty. Back then, Li Xiqing disappeared for 4 years because he wanted to protect her. Li Xiqing seemed to feel Su Qianxi's gaze and looked over. Her dark, almond-shaped eyes curved slightly. Then she turned her head and watched Nanny Rong's movements. "Did you see it clearly?" Nanny Rong glanced at him. Li Xiqing nodded and said, "I think so. I'll try." Little Moyun's eyes were wide open as he stared at Li Xiqing. Li Xiqing couldn't help but reach out and touch his little face. "Call me Daddy." Little Moyun immediately opened his mouth and his face turned red. Then he opened his mouth and burst into tears. Su Qianxi laughed out loud, but Li Xiqing panicked and said, "Why does this child cry?" Nanny Rong tried not to laugh. "That's what kids do. Go on." Li Xiqing wiped his little butt and carefully put a diaper on it. Nanny Rong couldn't stand it anymore. "Hurry up. How's the class going?" Sweating, Li Xiqing took a deep breath and tried to move faster. But in the end, she was still afraid of hurting the child, so she couldn't get up no matter what. Perhaps little Moyun was tired from crying. After a while, he closed his eyes and fell asleep with tear stains on his face. Finally putting the diaper on, Li Xiqing wiped his hands, his face covered with sweat. Nanny Rong said, "Put on the child's clothes. Don't let him catch a cold." Li Xiqing did as he was told. Although it was clothes, it was actually a layer of swaddling clothes. I have to explain that I was out the whole day and when I came back I realized that 60 chapters had been deleted. Because it was an anti-pornography campaign, the deleted chapters should be sexual ones. Chapter 1932. He put the child on the small bed next to him and asked Nanny Rong to take care of him. Only then could Li Xiqing wipe his sweat. Su Qianxi still didn't look too good. Li Xiqing sat by her bed with a little heartache and said, "You've worked hard, my wife." Su Qianxi pursed her lips and smiled. "You've worked hard too." Hearing that, Li Xiqing blushed inexplicably. He coughed and said, "Are you tired? Sleep for a while." Su Qianxi smiled and responded softly. Nanny Rong saw that and said, "What are you sleeping for? Eat something first and preserve your strength. Otherwise you'll be exhausted." Then she picked up the tonic soup and said, "Have some soup first. Sir, feed madam some." "I don't want to drink it." Su Chinsi looked at Nanny Rong. "I'm sleepy." "No, you must drink it." Nanny Rong was rarely so firm and strict. "If you don't drink it, don't even think about sleeping." Seeing Nanny Rong like this, Su Chinsi had no choice but to sit up. After drinking some soup, Su Chinsi couldn't stand it anymore and fell asleep on the bed. Seeing her asleep, Li Xiqing stood up and walked over to the child. Looking at little Moyun's sleeping face, his mood quietly started to become better. His son was born and he had watched him. Honey, I want to eat something sour and spicy." "Oh Ming. You bastard, you're hiding my ice cream again." "Tcho, where's my waist pad?" Oh Ming had been very busy recently. It was said that pregnant women were difficult to handle, and he had experienced it firsthand. Not only did her taste change, but her temper was also volatile. Oh Ming couldn't handle this kind of situation at all. The O residents had sent an extra nanny. Oh Ming had to go to the company during the day and come back at night to accompany his wife. It was fine when Yu Lily was in a good mood, but when she was in a bad mood, Oh Ming didn't have a good time. Honey, where's my candy?" Yu Lily had lost something for the umpteenth time, and then looked at Oh Ming with a face full of grievance. Oh Ming was used to it. He looked at her and said, "You can't eat candy. You have to exercise more." Before she was pregnant, she was only 40 pounds at her fattest. With a height of 1.6 meters, this weight was quite thin. But after getting pregnant, not only did her belly get bigger, but her whole body also swelled up like a balloon. Now Yu Lily weighed 110 kilograms. Her whole face was round and she had a big belly. It was hard to imagine that she used to be thin. "The last few times you went for a prenatal checkup, the doctor told you to exercise more. Your blood sugar is a little high, so you're not allowed to eat sweets." Yu Lily looked at him and pouted as she asked, "Do you think I'm fat?" In the past, when she was skinny, he despised her for being too skinny. Now that she was fat, he despised her for being fat. Could they still play happily? When Oh Ming heard that, he snorted. "Why did you ask if you knew?" He pulled his wife over and said, "I've fed you until you're full. Come, let's take a walk outside. Don't eat any more." "But I want to eat candy, just one." "No. At a time like this, I can't spoil you. Mom is coming over later and it'll be time for dinner. Let's go for a walk first." Yu Lily's eyes lit up. She smiled and said, "Yeah. When is Mom coming?" Chapter 1933. Yu Lily took Oh Ming's arm and said, "Oh, she is your mother. Since she is your mother, she is my mother. Why are you jealous? It's so boring." Oh Ming glared at Yu Lily but soon turned his head and said, "I have to ask Mom to make less delicious food later. It will be difficult to give birth." "No," Yu Lily said indifferently. "Anyway, I am ready for a cesarean section. It is very painful to have a natural birth. Qian had a natural birth this time. I heard that it is much more painful than a cesarean section." Oh Ming glanced at her and his lips curled up slightly. Because they were all pregnant, several expectant mothers had created a WeChat group. Among them, Yu Lily was the group leader. There were 4 women in the group: Yi Yuyu, Su Chenxi, Qiumanyu, and Yu Lily. Qiumanyu was a military doctor, so she didn't spend much time in the group. However, Su Chenxi often shared her mother's happiness with them, as well as the things that a mother needed to pay attention to. Yu Lily was very open in the group. After listening to Su Chenxi and Yi Yuyu's teachings, she didn't take Oh Ming's warning seriously at all. Oh Ming was helpless, but he couldn't help but feel happy for her. Although she came a little late, she was still Yu Lily's best friend, wasn't she? In the end, Oh Ming dragged Yu Lily out of the door. Although it was a walk, Yu Lily didn't want to walk at all. Her footsteps were very slow. Oh Ming waited beside her and he also looked very slow. Yu Lily was waiting for him impatiently, and then she would ask to go home and wait for Qiao Ziqing. However, Oh Ming not only didn't show any impatience, but also looked at Yu Lily with interest. He raised his eyebrows slightly and asked, "Why don't you walk?" Yu Lily pouted and walked slowly. She didn't want to walk at all. Looking at Oh Ming, she said, "Honey, I am tired." "But you walked less than 300 meters, Oh Ming said. We walked out of the house and it is a full 500 meters. It is so far. How long do you want me to walk?" Yu Lily said bitterly. Her face was wrinkled and she looked at Oh Ming pitifully. Oh Ming stood beside her looking very calm. "No, it's only about 200 meters. Let's go." I don't want to go. My legs are sore. Seeing Yu Lily acting so coquettishly, Ming couldn't bear to see her like this. He said, let's head home. Yu Lily's previously bitter face immediately brightened up. She said, all right hubby. Mom should be here soon. Let's go home and wait for her. With that, she let go of Ming's hand and walked home with light footsteps. Where was the look of someone who looked like he was about to die after taking 2 steps? Ming stared at her back and followed her helplessly. Didn't you say you were tired? Yes, so I have to hurry home and sit down or I will be exhausted. Yu Lily looked serious and looked at him with a bright smile. Yu Lily was out of breath as she quickened her pace. The baby in her belly seemed to be a little unhappy and gave her a kick in the belly. Yu Lily stood still and looked at her belly. She exclaimed in surprise, Ming, come and see. Your son is kicking me. Ming wasn't far away. When he heard that, he quickly ran over and shouted, where? Chapter 1934. Haha. Yu Lily looked at Ming gloatingly. When Ming saw Yu Lily's expression, he gritted his teeth and said, if you give birth to a son, I'll beat you up. If you dare to beat my son, I'll beat you up. Yu Lily put her hands on her hips and looked at Ming with arrogance. As she spoke, she swaggered in the direction of her home like a local tyrant. After the new year, the weather was particularly good. For the past few days, the sun had been shining brightly. The weather was clear and Yu Lily's mood was naturally better. Recently, Ming had strictly controlled her diet. He even restricted her from eating more than 1 piece of meat. Therefore, Yu Lily looked forward to Qiao Ziqing's visit every day to break her taboos. When Qiao Ziqing arrived, she led Nanny Zhang to prepare a large table of dishes for Yu Lily with a smile. Yu Lily ate with great enthusiasm. Although most of the dishes were Nanny Zhang's handiwork, without Qiao Ziqing, Yu Lily would not have been able to eat so much. After eating, Ming wanted to take Yu Lily for a walk. Yu Lily felt a wave of discomfort in her stomach. At first, she thought she wanted to go to the bathroom. After hiding in the bathroom of the room and sitting for a while, he felt that something was wrong. The pain in her stomach was getting worse and Yu Lily couldn't take it anymore. She held onto the door and walked out, shouting, help! Everyone was busy working and Ming was talking to Qiao Ziqing. When he heard Yu Lily's cry, he immediately panicked. He quickly ran up and saw that Yu Lily was about to cry. He asked, what's wrong? My stomach hurts. Yu Lily looked at Ming with a pitiful look and clutched her stomach. Ming was shocked. He quickly went up to hold her and asked, is the baby about to go into labor? But it's not the due date yet. Nanny Zhang heard the movement from below and ran up. She said, lie down first. Don't worry. Why are you lying down? What if you give birth later? It won't. There are still 7 or 8 days before the due date. The closer it is to the due date, the lower the fetal position will be. It's normal to have a stomach ache. Lie down for a while. If it still hurts later, we'll go to the hospital. Really? Ming found it a little mysterious. Nanny Zhang glared at him and said, I have experience. You can't go wrong trusting me. Yes. Some things, it was always right to believe in the older generation. He helped Yu Lily lie down. As expected, Yu Lily quickly fell asleep. Ming breathed a sigh of relief, but he was also speechless. Walking out, Nanny Zhang looked at Ming and said, I was right, wasn't I? Yes, I fell asleep. Ming laughed bitterly and took out a cigarette. Thank you. Nanny Zhang glanced at him and said, don't stand on ceremony with me. But it's best if you don't smoke anymore. It's not good for pregnant women and children. Well, I don't smoke. Ming put the cigarette in his mouth and sat down on the sofa without lighting it. After smoking for so many years, it was impossible for him to quit just like that. But for the sake of his wife and children, Ming had been much more well-behaved recently. Mrs. has gone back. Young master, the next time Mrs. comes, don't let her buy so many ingredients. It's not a waste, but it's not good to let Lily eat too much. Chapter 1935. Nanny Zhang glanced at her and said, hurry up and coax her. The labor pains before childbirth are also very uncomfortable, especially for those who have never given birth before. I'm afraid she can't take it. Ming had already stood up and walked over. Yu Lily was lying on her side on the bed with a painful look. When she saw Ming coming over, she said, I think I'm going to give birth. Honey, I'm bleeding down there. Ming was shocked. He looked down and saw some bloodstains. Not many, but there were some. Yu Lily wanted to get up, but her stomach hurt badly. Ming picked her up and hurried downstairs. Nanny Zhang helped me get the key. I'll take her to the hospital. Yu Lily was wearing a pink cotton nightgown. Nanny Zhang took a look and saw the patch of red behind Yu Lily. She exclaimed, "Oh, there's blood." She found the car keys for Ming and opened the door for him. "Hurry up, it'll be troublesome if your water breaks." Yu Lily's stomach hurt badly. "Didn't you say that the due date is still a few days away?" "It's only a few days away. The baby is full term, so it doesn't matter which day it is." Nanny Zhang comforted him and helped him open the car door. After letting his wife in, Nanny Zhang said, "I'll go and lock the door. I'll take care of Lily. Let's go to the hospital together. A crude man like you won't know anything." "All right." Ming agreed without even thinking about it. After Nanny Zhang locked the door, she hurried to the back seat. The pain in Yu Lily's stomach became more and more unbearable. With a bitter face she said, "I'm never going to have another child again." "Ba ba ba." Nanny Zhang smacked her lips and said, "Don't say such things now. Don't scare the child too much to come out." Yu Lily grimaced. "But, it was really painful. It hurt so much." Halfway down the road, Yu Lily suddenly felt water flowing down. But strangely it didn't hurt as much now. Yu Lily leaned on Nanny Zhang, gasping for breath. There was a layer of sweat on her forehead. "Oh, young master, oh, hurry up. If you don't hurry up, how can I make it in time? My water has broken." "What?" Ming's face suddenly changed. He accelerated the car to its maximum speed. In the blink of an eye, he had already run several red lights. He didn't know where the information came from, but it was almost instinctive and deep-rooted. He believed that if her water broke and she hadn't been sent to the hospital, then it was a very serious matter. Ming's heart was getting more and more flustered. He had to drive fast, but he had to drive steadily. When they finally arrived at the hospital, Ming carried Yu Lily out. His face was pale with fright. He yelled, "How can there be so much blood?" Yu Lily's nightgown was stained red. It looked bloody and wretched. Red liquid continued to drip down from the Ferrari and flowed down to the ground. Yu Lily's expression didn't look too good. Suddenly, Ming thought of the past. Didn't the television dramas and movies she watched with Qiao Ziqing when she was young have the female lead bleed to death during childbirth? "Don't worry, this isn't blood." "How can it not be blood? Do you think I'm blind?" Ming roared. He ran to the hospital with a pale face and shouted, "Doctor, doctor." When he was sent to the emergency room, the nurse took a look and wrote down a record. She said, "Send her to the delivery room to open the cervix first." Then she looked at Ming and asked, "How long has her water broken?" Chapter 1936. Hearing such fierce words, the nurse was speechless. She explained helplessly, "Mr. O, it's not all blood. The pregnant woman's water broke and mixed with blood looks a little scary, but in fact it's normal." When Ming heard that, his brows furrowed deeply. He was skeptical. "And your wife's is relatively normal. There's nothing special. Don't worry, leave it to us. You wait here." As she spoke, she had already registered and turned to follow Yu Lily's bed. Nanny Zhang felt helpless and amused and said, "Master O, you sit here. Women don't give birth so quickly." "No, I want to go in." "No, it's bad luck for a man to go in when a woman gives birth." Nanny Zhang held Ming back. "You can't go in." "Why not?" "When second brother's wife gave birth, second brother also squatted in there for a long time." Ming was not convinced and shouted, "How can that be the same? Second brother's wife is having a second child. When second brother's assistant gave birth, her man also went in with her. That's because she didn't have an elder to guide her. She doesn't know that it's actually not good for men." Ming asked, "Nanny Zhang, why did I bring you here?" Nanny Zhang was speechless. By the time Qiao Ziqing arrived, a long time had passed. Ming had signed the papers, and his heart was burning with anxiety. Nanny Zhang held him back. When she saw Qiao Ziqing coming over, she said, "Madam, quickly stop Master O. This guy always wants to go in. How can a man go in when a woman is giving birth?" Hearing that, Qiao Ziqing immediately went up to Ming and said, "No, you can't go in. If you go in and distract Lily, if the child doesn't come naturally, it's all your fault." Hearing that, Ming finally became obedient. But soon, Ming began to refute and said, "Then why can second brother go in to accompany his wife to give birth? His wife gave birth to a second child, so she has experience and strong willpower. Your wife gave birth to a first child." Qiao Ziqing analyzed the situation seriously and looked at Ming. "And don't you know your wife? Maybe she was born fine. What if you go in and she starts wailing like a ghost and howling like a wolf? When that happens, she'll really be distracted. How are you going to play?" Ming was convinced. He pursed his lips and said nothing. Staring at the door, Ming sat on a chair outside. He waited from afternoon to night. With a cigarette dangling from his mouth, Ming was extremely anxious. Staring at the door of the delivery room, she stood up repeatedly and paced back and forth. Looking at the time, it was already past 8 in the evening. Ming felt more and more uneasy and said, "Why isn't it done yet?" Nanny Zhang glared at him and said, "How can a woman give birth in a hurry? Some women give birth for a week." 1 week? Ming's heart skipped a beat. Yes, you really don't believe me. There really was a woman who gave birth for a week. It was a little uncomfortable, but at least she gave birth to the child. How are you going to eat and drink for a week? How does she get up? Ming couldn't imagine it. Doesn't the pregnant woman feel uncomfortable? Chapter 1937. Ming was speechless. Actually, he wasn't in a hurry, but Nanny Zhang's words made him even more nervous. Ming took the cigarette out of his mouth and twirled it in his palm. It's been so long. Is you Lily hungry? Don't worry. She can't even wait to give birth. She won't feel hungry at all. Nanny Zhang's words made Ming feel even more anxious. Qiao Ziqing saw Ming's expression and said, "Nanny Zhang, don't scare him. Lily is in good health. Who knows, she might give birth soon. Don't worry." Yeah, Ming replied calmly. His pacing back and forth became more and more irritated. They waited until 9 p.m. when Huijin came over and said, "It looks like she won't be out for a while. Hurry up and eat something. Your health is more important." Qiao Ziqing glanced at Ming and saw that he was extremely nervous. Ming clenched his fists and paced back and forth. It was as if he hadn't heard Huijin's words. Qiao Ziqing called out to him and Ming suddenly raised his head. "Ming, go eat first." Ming glanced at them and said, "You guys go ahead. I'm not hungry. I'll wait here for you Lily to come out." Wait for you Lily, not wait for the child. It seemed like there were only a few words different, but the meaning was worlds apart. Qiao Ziqing was both relieved and distressed. Huijin said, "We'll bring some back for you later." "No need. I'll wait for her to come out and eat together." Ming glanced at them. "Mom, is it really painful for a woman to give birth?" "It's very painful." Qiao Ziqing glanced at him. You didn't feel any pain when your mother gave birth to you. Now that your wife is giving birth, you're like this. How realistic." It was a simple joke. Ming couldn't laugh at all. He twitched his lips and waved his hand. "Hurry up and go. I'll let you know when she comes out." Huijin and his wife saw this and left with Nanny Zhang. Ming paced back and forth outside many times. It was not until 11 o'clock in the evening that the door of the delivery room was opened. Ming's eyes lit up. He quickly went up and asked, "How is it?" "Congratulations, it's a little princess." "Little princess?" "Little princess." Ming was ecstatic and shouted, "A girl? Princess? My God." He stepped forward and took a look at the baby in the swaddling clothes, but he quickly looked away and said, "Where's my wife?" "She's inside. Someone will push her out. I'll take a look at the child first. She'll be transferred to another ward later." The nurse held the child in her arms and looked at Ming strangely. "Aren't you going to hold your daughter?" Okay. Ming reached out his hand, but his eyes kept looking inside. "Can I go in and see my wife now?" "Wait a minute, why don't you hold your daughter first?" The nurse leaned over. "Do you want a wife instead of a child?" Ming was a little embarrassed as he looked at the red-faced child in front of him. Soon, his eyes overflowed with a sincere smile. He hugged Zhang Shen carefully. "Be careful, the pregnant lady is coming out, make way." There was the sound of wheels being pushed. Ming immediately looked away and saw Yu Lily on the delivery bed. He quickly walked toward her. Chapter 1938. Ming quickly stood still on the spot. Looking down, he saw the child in his arms who had his own blood. A smile appeared on his face as he looked at the slightly wrinkled little face. Then he carefully followed. Yu Lily had already fallen asleep and was lying on the bed. She didn't look well. His phone rang and Ming jumped in shock. He quickly turned off the sound and placed the phone by his ear. "Hello, Mom. Where are you? I heard that you've recovered. I brought some soup for Lily." Ming gave Qiao Ziqing the room number and quickly and carefully sat down with the child in his arms. He had never liked children since he was a child. Other than Li Xiqing's 2 children, he had never been close to any other children. Ming had never seen such a small child before, let alone held one in his arms like this. Ming couldn't help but laugh. He wanted to tease the child, but the little child had been sleeping with his eyes closed. He was very quiet. "You're acting like a fool," a soft voice said, and Ming immediately raised his head. Lily glanced at Ming and said, "It's a girl." "Yeah." Ming's face bloomed with joy. "I like girls." As if she understood Ming's words, the baby in the swaddling clothes moved and opened her eyes. A pair of clear eyes looked a little swollen, and her little mouth was slightly pouting. Her pink cheeks were even more pleasing to Ming's eyes. "Our daughter is so beautiful." Ming held the baby and said, "Come, call me Daddy." Lily laughed and said, "If I call you now, you'll be scared to death." "Ah ha ha." Ming laughed happily. He looked at his daughter and asked, "Why aren't you crying?" Lily was speechless. "Are you hungry? Mommy went to get you something to eat. Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere?" Ming reached out and touched Lily's forehead. "Why is it so cold? I'll get you some hot water. Give me the child." Lily held out her hands. Ming looked at the child and then at the water dispenser not far away. He reluctantly handed the little baby in his arms to his big baby. Ming placed the child by the pillow and stepped forward saying, "Sit up first. Come on." Lily only felt a pang of pain. He helped her sit up carefully and he put a few pillows behind her. She held the child in her arms. His small, weak body and big, clear eyes clearly told Lily that she had given birth to a little life of her own. It was a wonderful feeling. Lily suddenly felt that she had matured a lot. The corners of his lips curled up unconsciously as he asked, "What's our daughter's name?" Smile. Ming was pouring water. When he heard this, he turned around and laughed like a fool. "I've been thinking about it for a long time. I was just waiting for you to wake up to tell you. Her nickname will be Xiao Xiao. I'll think about her real name later." "Yes, Xiao Xiao." However, as soon as he shouted, Xiao 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 suddenly struggled and started crying. "Wow, what's wrong? Why are you crying?" Ming walked over with a glass of water. "Don't you like the name? Then Daddy will get another one." Chapter 1939. Huajin came in with 2 thermos flasks. They looked very large. Qiao Ziqing was in front, her eyes fixed on her precious granddaughter. A smile bloomed on her face as she said, "Oh, you're so pretty. You look like Daddy and Mommy." Her little face turned even redder from crying, and her little hands and feet moved. She didn't have much strength, but Qiao Ziqing was even happier when she heard that. She said, "Hurry up and drink some soup. The child is going to be hungry." Huajin placed the bowl on the table. Ming went forward to open the lid and help his wife drink the soup. Lily had no strength at all. She leaned against the side of the bed and didn't want to move. She said, "I have no appetite." "No, you have to drink some." Qiao Ziqing's tone was firm. She didn't allow any room for negotiation. Giving birth is like taking a trip to the gates of hell. If you don't drink some, it'll be troublesome if something happens to your body later. Be good and replenish your energy before you go back to sleep. You'll recover faster that way. Lily pouted, but she still took the bowl of fish soup from Ming's hands and took a sip. She didn't know if it was a psychological effect, but she didn't feel anything when she wasn't drinking. Now that she had a mouthful of soup, her stomach started to feel hungry. Qiao Ziqing glanced at it and said, "Eat some fish and other nutritious dishes." "Mom, did you forget to add salt again?" Lily held the bowl. The more she drank, the more tasteless it became. "It's so bland. You can't have salt." Qiao Ziqing carried the child. "I'll get the nurse to ask for some milk. Hurry up and feed the baby some milk later." Lily's face fell. "Why don't I just feed the baby? Isn't breast milk the most nutritious? You have to be able to produce milk first. I'm afraid there's no milk now." Qiao Ziqing carried the baby and walked out. Nanny Zhang had already left work. Huajin looked at the time and said, "It's getting late. Ming, stay here and take care of your wife. I'll get Auntie Qing to take care of her later. She'll stay in the hospital for a few days before going home to recuperate. Your mother's health isn't good. I'll take her home first." Ming was speechless. Lily drank the soup and nodded. "Okay, then let Aunt Qing come here quickly." "Dad, I don't think Ming can handle it. I don't trust the special nurse." "All right." Huajin looked at Lily and smiled kindly. "Thank you for your hard work." Lily was a little embarrassed and said, "I'm a woman, let's go. Take care of your wife." Huajin patted Ming on the shoulder. "You don't have to go to the company for now. If I can't handle it, I'll pass it to you." "Dad, there are a lot of things you can't handle." "Impudent." Huajin glared at him, but he quickly chuckled. Sleep early. Good night, Dad. Yu Lily waved. You're in good spirits. A nurse walked in. How do you feel? Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere? The nurse did a simple check and left. Xiao Ziqing came back with the baby in her arms. However, the baby had already fallen asleep and seemed to have eaten his fill. I bought a breast pump. You can give the baby milk after you pump it out. Yes, Mom, Ming said. Also, the special nurse will be here in a while, but you must take good care of the baby. I'll get Auntie Qing to come over as well. She'll be here later. Yes, Mom, Ming said. By the way, Lily. Chapter 1940. This was the first time that Yu Lily and Ming had become parents, so they were unfamiliar with many things. For example, changing the baby's diaper, feeding the baby, and waking the sleeping baby up to drink milk. Everything seemed novel and inevitable. After staying in the hospital for 5 days, Yu Lily's condition was much better. After leaving the hospital and moving to her home, Yu Lily felt a lot more relaxed. The baby had always been sleepy. Apart from eating all day, he only slept. He spent very little time awake. At one point, Ming thought that his child might be a fool. However, when he heard that it was normal for newborns to be sleepy, he was relieved. Yi Qianshan and Yu Lily hadn't seen each other for a long time. When she heard that they had a daughter, Yi Qianshan was very envious. She went to Ming's house with Shinjilia and brought a lot of gifts. Yu Lily was still in her confinement period, so Ming's mother was very strict and didn't allow Yu Lily to leave the room. Shinjilia couldn't see her at all, and Yi Qianshan was too embarrassed to enter their bedroom, so she simply played with the child in the living room. The newborn child was covered in a layer of pink, and her skin was so transparent that her blood vessels could be seen. Xiao Zhao's skin was very white, just like Yu Lily. She looked beautiful and obedient. Her eyelashes were long, and her eyes were closed as she slept. Yi Qianshan's heart was about to explode. She's so cute, old Shin. Yi Qianshan hugged Xiao Xiao. She looked so much like Lily. Shinjilia glanced at the child's face, which obviously hadn't grown up yet, and asked, "How can you tell? They both have 2 eyes, 2 noses, and 1 mouth?" This small face was very young and tender. The features looked small, but when put together, there wasn't much recognition. Yes, they look alike. Yi Qianshan looked left and right and confirmed. Look, they look like Ming too. Look at the nose. Ming's nose is very high, Shinjilia said. The nose hasn't grown out yet. How can you tell? Yi Qianshan glared at him and said, "Can't you have a little imagination? Look at the shape of the nose. It's so similar to him. The eyelashes are so long, so similar to Lily's. Look at the mouth. It's small and also like Lily's." Shinjilia replied, "Well, if you say so." Ming stood to the side and watched them bicker. He snorted and came forward to carry his daughter back. He said, "Of course my daughter looks like me. It's said that daughters take after their fathers. I can't tell now, but when she grows up, she'll definitely be a beauty." "You don't really look like a beauty." Shinjilia leaned back on the sofa. "Lily, on the other hand, is quite pretty." "Well, your future children can't look like you. Yi Qianshan is quite cute. If they look like you, they'll be ruined." Ming didn't even raise his eyebrows as he teased his daughter. "Don't you agree, Xiao Xiao?" Yi Qianshan laughed and said, "Ming, why don't you move Lily somewhere else? I'll go talk to Lily." "Go in. It's fine. There's nothing to hide inside." Ming glanced at her. Xiao Xiao was born less than a week ago. So, they can't have sex. Chapter 1941. Yu Lily had long known that Yi Qianshan was coming. Ming came in to inform her. She even changed her clothes and combed her hair to make herself look clean and tidy. Unexpectedly, Yi Qianshan still hadn't shown up. She had just sat down on the bed in disappointment when she heard a knock on the door. Ming had entered the room and made some noise, but he would never knock on the door. Only Yi Qianshan would knock on the door at this time. Yu Lily's eyes lit up and she said, "Come in." Sure enough, the door opened. A head popped in. When Yi Qianshan saw Yu Lily, she smiled brightly. "Qianshan, my God, you've become prettier." Yu Lily looked as if she had seen a ghost. She covered her mouth and said, "You've lost a lot of weight." Yi Qianshan subconsciously touched her face and looked at her body. She said, "No, it's just your imagination. How long has it been since you last saw me?" "It's true. You've lost weight." Yu Lily stepped forward and pinched her chin. "You used to have 2 chins, but now, get lost. You're the one with 2 chins." Yi Qianshan slapped her hand away in annoyance. Yu Lily laughed and reached out to pinch Yi Qianshan's chest. Watch, they've grown bigger. Yi Qianshan blushed and quickly closed the door. She covered her chest and said, "Are you done yet? Aren't you ashamed?" Tsk. Yu Lily stared at her. "Why is your skin so thin?" "Oh no, it's all over. Love really makes people vulgar. You've changed. You're the vulgar one. You've changed," Yu Lily said with a pained expression. "Shinjilia has trained you to be such a little woman. It's so scary. Why didn't I know he had such tricks up his sleeve?" Yi Qianshan's face darkened. "Why are you getting more and more shameless? You used to be more like a little woman than me, but now you're like a hooligan." "How am I a hooligan? How did you lose so much weight? Did you lose weight?" As Yu Lily spoke, she brought out a stool for her. Yi Qianshan sat down and shrugged. "Oh, I just learned to keep fit from Shinjilia some time ago. I stopped eating snacks and started exercising. F***ck, this isn't considered losing weight." Yu Lily was envious and jealous. She pinched the flesh on her waist. "Look at how fat I am. You're different. You've already given birth to a child. It's normal for you to be fat. If I want to have a child, I have to train my body a little better." Yi Qianshan was a little envious. "Do you think fate really exists in this world?" "Of course." Yu Lily blurted out. When she saw the complicated expression on Yi Qianshan's face, she immediately corrected herself and said, "For this kind of thing, it exists if you believe it, and it doesn't exist if you don't." "Why do you ask?" "Did Shinjilia's grandmother read your fortune before?" "What did she say?" "Me?" Yu Lily thought about it and said, "She said that my fate before I was 25 years old wasn't very good. After that, my luck changed. I think it was quite accurate." "Didn't she say that I might be infertile?" "Even the doctor said that the possibility of me getting pregnant wasn't very high. But when she read my fortune, she said that I would give birth to a son and a daughter. After the wedding, I found out that I was pregnant." Yu Lily shrugged her shoulders and looked at Yi Qianshan. "Did the old lady read your fortune again?" Yi Qianshan suddenly felt like crying. Yi Qianshan could be said to have seen Yu Lily's fate from the perspective of a bystander. Chapter 1942. It was so accurate that it made her hair stand on end. Sometimes Yi Qianshan felt that she was overthinking things. But it turned out that it was better to believe in such things. One look at Yu Lily showed that it was true. When Yu Lily saw Yi Qianshan's expression, she knew. She asked curiously, "What did she say?" "Sob." Yi Qianshan felt uncomfortable and said, "She said that I might not live past 28 years old. That I'm short-lived." Yi Qianshan hadn't even told Yi Zhenhua about it. She was afraid that the old man would worry. Apart from Shinjilia herself and the blind uncle, only the Shin family knew about it. Now Yu Lily was one more person who knew about it. Indeed, when Yu Lily heard that, her eyes widened and she said, "No way. How is that possible? You don't look like someone who's short-lived." Yi Qianshan looked at her with grievance. "What you think is useless. I think I'm doing very well. But there seems to be a turning point in the future. She said that I might be infertile or that I might die early or something else. But that kind of thing is probably not very accurate, right?" Yu Lily coughed and said, "Yes, it's true if you believe it. If you don't, it's not true. Old Mrs. Shin is a bit like a fraud. I don't think it's very reliable." "Yeah." Yi Qianshan agreed. "I think so too. Under such circumstances we can only wait and see. Anyway, I don't really believe it." "You shouldn't believe it." Yu Lily glared at her. "When are you getting married?" "Marriage? It's still early. March 5th. There's only a little more than a month left. It's not early. You have to be mentally prepared. Getting married is very tiring." "I know." Yi Qianshan yawned. "I'll take it one step at a time. I'm so tired." "Why? Shinjilia didn't let you sleep?" Yu Lily smiled ambiguously and gently touched her. Yi Qianshan blushed and said, "Are you going to die? How can you say anything now?" "It's nothing. We're all adults. Who doesn't know that?" Yu Lily smiled. "But have you gone to the hospital for a checkup? Didn't they say you might be infertile? Didn't you go?" "I went to see a doctor. Everything is normal, but I can't get pregnant." Yi Qianshan rested her chin on her hand and was a little puzzled. "I've always calculated the danger period and the safe period, but I still haven't gotten pregnant." "No protection?" "No." Yi Qianshan still felt a little embarrassed to answer such a question. Her cheeks were slightly red. Yu Lily could tell what he was thinking. She laughed and said, "Your skin is getting thinner and thinner. Shinjilia is really something. His methods are really impressive. He's managed to train our tough girl to this extent." Yi Chanshan was speechless. But according to what you said, both of you are planning to get pregnant, and there's nothing wrong with your checkup. Could it be that Xinjilia? Yi Chanshan widened her eyes and looked at Yu Lily. She had never considered this possibility. Xinjilia would have a problem? Oh, how could there be any problems when he was so energetic and lively, as if he couldn't wait to kill her in bed? However, doubt was like a seed. It was easy to implant and slowly it began to take root and sprout. After verbally denying the possibility, Yi Chanshan was a little distracted when she got home. Xinjilia finished cooking and called out, "It's time to eat. I'm so sleepy. I can't take it anymore. I'll go to sleep first." Chapter 1943. After placing the last dish on the table, Xinjilia untied his apron. Yi Chanshan sat on the sofa. When she looked up, she saw Xinjilia carefully arranging the bowls and chopsticks. Good man, good man. But, ever since she had returned from Yu Lily's place, Yi Chanshan had felt that something was wrong. She had been with Xinjilia for a long time. Except for the time in the beginning she had not deliberately used contraception. But even after such a long time, Yi Chanshan had not shown any signs of pregnancy. There was nothing wrong with her body. It had been checked. Then, the more Yi Chanshan thought about it, the more likely it seemed. She stood up and went to the kitchen to wash her hands. As she washed, she thought about how to tell Xinjilia. Xinjilia had already filled the bowl with rice. When he saw that she was a little distracted, he asked, "What's wrong?" Yi Chanshan quickly came back to her senses and said, "Nothing." Xinjilia sat down and placed a bowl of rice in front of her. "Are you in a bad mood? Did you get upset at Yu Lily's place today?" Yu Lily had given birth to a daughter, but they had not done anything. Yi Chanshan didn't know, but Xinjilia himself was quite upset. Yi Chanshan glanced at Xinjilia and pouted. "How could I be upset? I just feel that there is something. What is it? What is it?" Yi Chanshan didn't know either. But if she said it, would it affect Xinjilia's mood? But if she didn't say it, Yi Chanshan felt that it would affect her mood. Thinking about it, she felt a little depressed. Yi Chanshan didn't answer. Xinjilia frowned and asked, "What is it?" She quietly looked up at Xinjilia and found that he didn't look too good at the moment. He reminded her, "I feel that if I say it, it might affect your mood." It was rare for Yi Chanshan to be so hesitant. Xinjilia looked at her and didn't know whether to laugh or be annoyed. After a moment he said, "Go ahead." Yi Chanshan picked up the bowl and took a bite. She chewed the rice in her mouth and whispered, "I'm thinking about the problem of the child." Xinjilia relaxed and said, "Ha." Actually, he had already guessed it. Yi Chanshan had been unhappy and distracted ever since she returned from work in the afternoon. It was most likely because of this matter. It was expected. Xinjilia took a sip of soup and waited for Yi Chanshan to continue. Unexpectedly, Yi Chanshan widened her eyes and looked at him. She asked, "Didn't we go for a checkup earlier? There's nothing wrong with my body, right?" "Yeah," Xinjilia replied. It was as if he already knew what she wanted to say. Raising his eyes, he stared at her. Yi Chanshan felt as if she had been seen through. He coughed lightly and said, "Then we haven't used any contraceptives for so long, and we still haven't gotten pregnant. I'm thinking, is there something wrong with your body?" Xinjilia paused in the act of eating and put the bowl down. The delicious soup in his mouth suddenly became unpleasant. Sure enough, it was a sentence that affected his mood. He put down the bowl and looked at Yi Chanshan. "Did you hear it from Lily?" Yi Chanshan smiled awkwardly and didn't reply. Chapter 1944. Yi Chanshan quietly lowered her head and drank the soup. She didn't dare to look at him. It seemed to be a very unkind thing to have such doubts about a man. "Then what did you answer?" Xinjilia stared at her with curiosity in his eyes. Yu Lily's imagination was even more wild than Yi Chanshan's. If Yi Chanshan hesitated or admitted it, then in her eyes her man's dignity would be lost. Xinjilia felt a little bad. When Yi Chanshan heard that, she coughed softly and said, "How could I answer? I said it was impossible and then Lily didn't say anything else." "Oh." Xinjilia nodded. Yi Chanshan felt even more uncomfortable and said, "I think we can go for a checkup or something. Do we need to?" Xinjilia stared at Yi Chanshan. A pair of amber eyes, especially scorching. Yi Chanshan was scared by his gaze. She looked away and said, "I think? Well, let's eat." Xinjilia had a strong feeling that if he let Yi Chanshan speak again, he would be even more upset. After eating, Yi Chanshan obediently went to wash the dishes. It was rare for a day when she didn't take the initiative to speak. She didn't even make a sound. Shinjilia sat on the sofa and sent a message to Luo Ran. If a man is infertile, how do you treat it? I heard that Luo Ran has been a lot more obedient recently. Seems to be true. Luo Ran quickly replied. Luo Ran. Shinjilia. Luo Ran, you are infertile? Shinjilia. Luo Ran, F***ck you didn't do anything outside, did you? Why are you infertile? Shinjilia. No, it's just that my woman hasn't been pregnant. She suspects that it's my problem. Luo Ran. Shinjilia saw the string of symbols and felt even more annoyed. He replied, tell me what to do. Luo Ran. Well, men generally don't have this kind of situation unless it's congenital. Did your father and brother have this kind of situation? Shinjilia subconsciously thought of Shin Luo Un. Although he wasn't married, the number of women he had impregnated was indeed more than his. He replied, I don't think so. Luo Ran. That's right. Your brother is very experienced. Even he is fine. How could something happen to you? Shinjilia. Luo Ran. Go to the hospital for a checkup. Didn't you say that your woman is fine? If it's really you, then your woman will be wronged. Ah. Shinjilia. Finding Luo Ran was the wrong decision. Shinjilia threw his phone on the sofa in frustration. Then he saw that Yi Chanshan had already tidied up the kitchen. Shinjilia walked forward and saw Yi Chanshan walking out with her head lowered, not daring to look at him. Taking her hand, Shinjilia pressed her down onto the sofa. Yi Chanshan was shocked. Just as she was about to speak, she was forcefully suppressed. Today, Shinjilia seemed to want to prove something. He was fast and ruthless. Most importantly, it was very, very, very long. Yi Chanshan couldn't take it anymore. Panting, she called out, Shinji, let's go to the hospital together tomorrow. Shinjilia panted and leaned into her ear. Let's go have a look. You, slow down. Yi Chanshan was sweating profusely and on the verge of tears. Chapter 1945. They went to the hospital early in the morning to register. Yi Chanshan sat by the side the entire time. Shinjilia's series of checkups took almost an hour. When he was well, he didn't look too good. They walked to the hospital's garage together. Shinjilia got into the car and said, there was a female nurse who took advantage of me just now. Yi Chanshan couldn't hold it in and burst out laughing. Shinjilia pursed his lips and glanced at her. It's true. Yi Chanshan quickly comforted him and said, all right. Don't be angry. You shameless nurse. Was a man. Yi Chanshan laughed even louder. Shinjilia glared at her and Yi Chanshan stopped laughing. Shinjilia drove away unhappily. He was in a bad mood. Shinjilia pursed his lips and didn't say a word. He soon arrived home. It was rare for Shinjilia to be like this. Yi Chanshan followed behind him in silence. They went upstairs and returned home. As soon as Shinjilia entered the house, he went straight to the bathroom. After taking a shower, he saw Yi Chanshan sitting on the sofa and pounced on her. Yi Chanshan felt as if she was facing a formidable enemy. She immediately shouted, stop. Shinjilia didn't listen. He took off her clothes and said, men who are infertile will have sexual disorders. Oh, sexual disorders? That didn't exist. Yi Chanshan felt as if she had died and come back to life again. The day passed in a daze. When she woke up, Shinjilia wasn't by her side. When she walked out, he was sitting on the sofa looking at the computer. It was dim and the lights weren't on. Shinjilia was wearing a thin shirt and sitting cross-legged. Yi Chanshan walked over and hugged him from behind. Shinjilia's body was very cold from his body to his face. He gently placed his big hand on the back of her hand and kissed it gently. Yi Chanshan glanced at his computer screen. There was a case on it. She could tell that it was the patient's information. Are you busy? Yi Chanshan's voice was very soft, but it broke the silence in the empty space. Yeah, Shinjilia replied in a low voice. Are you hungry? Let's go out to eat. I'm not hungry. Yi Chanshan felt a little guilty. She asked, do you want some noodles? I'll cook some noodles for you. You're going to make me eat noodles? Shinjilia glanced up at her. Yi Chanshan was taken aback. She blushed and said, cook noodles? Shinjilia chuckled and quickly replied, sure. Yi Chanshan released him and took out a coat from inside. She tossed it at him and said, you won't freeze to death. Put it on. The corners of Shinjilia's lips curled into a smile. He quickly put it on and seemed to have thought of something. He said, by the way, I'm going back to the capital tomorrow. Tomorrow? Yes, I'm going back to work. Shinjilia straightened his clothes. Come to the capital in 2 weeks. We'll go to the Civil Affairs Bureau. Sure, Yi Qianshan replied without hesitation. Everything had been arranged. Just complete everything according to the schedule. As Yi Qianshan cooked the noodles, she suddenly felt like a married woman. The way she was now, could she be considered a good wife and loving mother? The two of them ate the noodles and slept in their clothes. During the day he was restless. At night, Yi Qianshan was on high alert and refused to let him touch her again. Shinjilia laughed to himself, but he didn't make any more moves. The next day when Yi Qianshan woke up, Shinjilia was already gone. Chapter 1946. When Yi Qianshan returned to the office, she was extremely busy. Within a few days she received Shinjilia's checkup report. The report was simple. There were no problems. Everything was normal. The sperm survival rate was higher than that of a normal person. However, she couldn't conceive a child. When Yi Qianshan sent the picture to Shinjilia, he replied with a smiley emoji with a few words, "This is fate." Sigh. This is fate. 2 weeks was neither long nor short. Yi Qianshan had already booked a ticket. When she got off the plane, Shinjilia was already waiting for her outside the airport. When she saw Shinjilia, Yi Qianshan almost pounced on him. She wrapped her arms around his waist and said with a smile, "I'm here." Shinjilia's eyes were filled with affection. He held her in his arms and took her luggage. The two of them quickly went down to the garage. "Have you eaten?" "I just had an airplane meal. It was terrible." Shinjilia smiled. "If you're not hungry, let's go to the Civil Affairs Bureau first and then find Mom and Dad for dinner." Yi Qianshan secretly clicked her tongue and said, "That's so sudden. Have you arranged everything?" "Yeah. Grandma went to play with Grandma Dongfang recently. She won't be back for a while. Don't be afraid." When Yi Qianshan heard that, she relaxed a little and said, "All right then. Let's go." Shinjilia had already made a reservation before he came. When he arrived, he didn't have to wait in line and went straight to get the certificate. When Yi Qianshan received the 2 red booklets, she still felt a little surreal. The marriage certificate was simple. On the red cover, the words "Marriage Certificate" were embossed in gold. There was only a thick piece of paper inside with their photos and names. But it was so simple that it felt like a dream. "We're getting married?" Yi Qianshan looked at Shinjilia. "That's so sudden." Shinjilia raised his eyebrows slightly and pulled her into his arms. "It's too late to regret it now. You're already mine." Yi Qianshan blushed slightly and whispered, "I've always been. We have a certificate in the future. Your name is written on my household register. You can't run away." Shinjilia lowered his head and gently kissed her forehead. "Let's go. Mom and Dad are waiting for us. When I see your parents later, what should I call them?" "Call me Daddy and Mommy. Call me whatever I call you." Shinjilia retrieved the car and started it. When they arrived, Yi Qianshan realized that there were quite a few people there. All kinds of relatives that she had seen and not seen before were gathered together. There were at least a dozen of them. Yi Qianshan felt a little uncomfortable and asked in a low voice, "Why are there so many people?" "Grandma said that we should have a small celebration first and invite the others in March. On March 15th we will go to Yun Town to celebrate again. Only then will the wedding be over." "So many? Which one is the official one?" "The 5th of March. That's the best day." Shinjilia planted a gentle kiss on her cheek. The people around them who saw it were in an uproar. Yi Qianshan's face turned red and she didn't speak for a long time. Shen Longyue and Mrs. Shen had been waiting for them for a long time. When they saw Yi Qianshan, they waved at her. "Qianshan, come and sit here." Yi Qianshan wanted to greet him, but she couldn't change the way she addressed him. After holding it in for a long time, he still couldn't utter a single word. Shinjilia could tell that and whispered, "It's okay. Take your time. Let's go over first." "Okay." Chapter 1947. A simple family dinner was considered a simple and formal meeting gift between relatives. However, it was just a meeting. After the meal, Yi Qianshan followed Shinjilia back to the Shin residence. As soon as they entered the Shin residence, they heard the crying of a baby. Such a sound was particularly jarring in a family with no children at all. Yi Qianshan looked at Shinjilia and asked, "Where did the child come from?" The corners of Shinjilia's mouth turned up slightly, but he didn't answer immediately. He walked in with Yi Qianshan and immediately saw Nanny He holding the child and coaxing him. Yi Qianshan hadn't seen many children, but this child didn't look like he was just born. He was at least a month or 2 old. Yi Chanshan leaned forward and looked at him curiously. She asked, "Whose child is this?" "Nanny," he smiled and said, "Young master's child." Yi Chanshan was shocked and immediately understood. She looked at Shinjilia, who nodded at her and said, "You guessed right." Yi Chanshan gasped and said, "How could she agree to send the child over?" Shinluo was a jerk. As a husband and a man, Yi Chanshan didn't think he was a success. Could such a person really take care of a child? "Where is she?" Yi Chanshan asked. Shinjilia just glanced at her and said, "I don't know. My brother said she died." "How is that possible?" Yi Chanshan couldn't believe it, but at the same time she felt a little sad. Shin Manting's fate was really not good. She met Shinluo and an old Mrs. Shen. Sigh. "I don't believe it either." Shinjilia sighed softly. "Do you want to hold the child?" Yi Chanshan wanted to hold the child, but she didn't dare to. It was Shin Manting's child. Shinluo's child. But after staring for a while, she couldn't help but reach out and take the child. The child couldn't stop crying. His little face was red from crying and his voice was loud. "Is it a boy or a girl?" Yi Chanshan stared at the child and squeezed his little hand. Miraculously, the moment Yi Chanshan squeezed, the child's crying became a little softer. As if curious, he opened a pair of wet, dark eyes and stared at Yi Chanshan. "He's so pretty." Yi Chanshan looked at the baby in her arms, and a smile spread across her lips. "The boy's name is Shin Yueshao." Shinjilia looked at the child. "What do you think about the name Grandma gave him?" "That sounds good," Yi Chanshan exclaimed. "You mean beyond?" "Yes, Shao, who is brave and skilled in battle." "It's really not bad. Did Grandma come up with this name?" "I don't know." Shinjilia stared at him. "The child was already here when I returned to the capital, but Sister Manting didn't come back." "You didn't see him?" "No." Shinjilia was a little self-deprecating. "My brother said she's dead. Where can I find her?" Yi Chanshan was silent. She found it hard to believe. Shin Manting wouldn't die so easily, right? January 25th, sunny. During the new year he came to visit me with more than a dozen bags of tonics. Without my permission he entered the rented apartment without permission. I didn't dare to go home and I got soaked in the rain. My stomach hurts, it's all because of this bastard. The 27th of January rain. Her stomach hurt for a long time but the baby still came out. It's a boy. It's said that children born during the new year have the best lives. They won't be at a disadvantage in terms of age. They'll live a full life. Fortunately, the baby is very healthy and didn't get sick because of my malnutrition. Chapter 1948. What is the purpose of a person's life? If she asked this question, perhaps no one would know the answer. Shin Manting asked herself this question over and over again. What is the purpose of living? But after thinking about it for a long time, she still couldn't figure it out. But she didn't dare to die. She was like a gambler who had nothing left. She had risked everything but in the end she still lost everything. Originally she wanted to give birth to the child and use it as a bargaining chip to threaten Shinluo. Even Shin Manting herself didn't know what exactly she wanted to force him to do. However, the longer she got pregnant, the less she thought about it. As his belly grew bigger and bigger, his desire for this child grew stronger and stronger. When she saw Shinluo, and again she suddenly realized that she had done something wrong. She shouldn't have kept the child in the first place. She thought that she would be cold to the end. The child was a bargaining chip and a means. But she didn't expect that in the end, it would become a shackle that tortured her. January 28th, there will be a thunderstorm. Baby, I was wrong. No one will take care of you and no one will take care of me. I'm running out of money. The nurse said that they can't take care of you. I'm useless. I can't give you milk. I'm sorry that you're hungry. The weather is getting worse. I can't take it anymore. Shin Manting lay on the hospital bed. Her face was pale. She stared at the soft tube that was constantly pumping water into her body. Suddenly she smiled gently. The baby lay in the crook of her arm, sleeping peacefully and peacefully. But the pain in her lower body made her feel hopeless. Shin Manting, it's time to eat. The nurse called out. Perhaps it was because her voice was too loud, or the thunder that sounded at the same time was too shocking. The baby in her arms suddenly twitched, then opened his mouth and cried. Shin Manting felt a little weak. She gently patted the baby's back, slowly and gently. Shin Manting endured the pain and sat up. She lifted the hem of her clothes and wanted to feed the baby. However, after the baby sucked on his soft lips a few times and realized that there was nothing there, he began to cry loudly again. The nurse rudely and impatiently put down the table. She placed the food on the table and went to call the next person. Zhang Chunhua. Hey, let me do it. In the same ward, a simple and honest man took the lunchbox from the nurse and said with a smile, "Thank you, nurse. You're beautiful and kind. Thank you." The nurse's face looked much better. She silently handed over an extra egg. The man laughed even more happily and said, "Thank you, thank you." Then, holding the bowl of rice, he turned to his wife and said, "This nurse is really nice. Come, have an egg to feed our baby. A newborn baby needs nutrition the most." His gentle and honest voice was not pleasant to the ears. But at this time, it was enough to warm the heart of a woman who had just given birth to his child. Tears welled up in her eyes. She gritted her teeth and sat up, shielding the crying baby in her arms. After breaking the eggshell, he peeled it off bit by bit and slowly ate it. When a child cried, the other children in the ward were inevitably affected. Soon the other child began to cry. A woman with a bad temper had given birth to her third child. Chapter 1949. His voice was full of resentment and harshness. She hugged her child and coaxed him. She murmured, "Good boy, don't cry. Wait for daddy to come back and hold you." Shin Manting was silent. She chewed the egg in her mouth and swallowed it slowly. But the boiled egg was too dry and Shin Manting almost choked. She forced herself to swallow it and reached for her glass of water. However, the water in the cup that she had asked the nurse to get was gone. She drank the last mouthful and finally felt a little better. However, the child in her arms was sobbing uncontrollably. When Shin Manting saw her blushing face, she couldn't help but feel aggrieved. Tears welled up in her eyes. She raised her hand and slapped her little face. She shouted, "Be quiet." But the child in her arms did not calm down. Instead, he cried even harder. The other mothers in the ward looked over. Shin Manting acted as if she didn't see it. She swallowed the last mouthful of the egg and then grabbed the chopsticks to eat the food in the lunchbox. It was terrible. It was really terrible. But Shin Manting still took big mouthfuls of food. Her vision was blurred, and her throat was sore from choking. Shin Manting's stomach was still not full after the last mouthful of food. She pulled the curtain up and directly lifted her clothes to feed the child. The child sucked a few mouthfuls and was quiet for a few seconds. But soon he struggled and cried again. He took a deep breath and tears fell. Shin Manting didn't say anything. She hugged the baby and gently coaxed him. After a while, she let him suck again. After she finally calmed the baby, Shin Manting finally lay down exhausted. She closed her eyes and fell asleep with the child in her arms. Suddenly, Shin Manting loosened her arms and trembled. Someone was stealing the child. As soon as this thought flashed through her mind, Shin Manting's entire body tensed up. She opened her eyes abruptly and saw a man. A young man. His hand was reaching toward her arms as if he wanted to hold the child. "You're awake." Shin Luo, Anne's voice was very low, and she couldn't hear his emotions. Shin Manting relaxed, but she immediately reached out and snatched the child back. Seeing that the baby was safe and sound, she stared at Shin Luo and vigilantly. Shin Luo and glanced at his watch and said, "Are you hungry? I'll buy you something to eat. Wait for me." "I don't need you," Shin Manting finally said. Her voice was hoarse from a prolonged drought. "I have food to eat." "Don't throw a tantrum with me," Shin Luo and said in a displeased tone. He turned around and walked out the door. When he came back, he was holding a thermos flask. He opened it, tested the temperature and said, "Drink some water." Shin Manting hadn't drunk water for a long time, and her mouth was extremely dry. Seeing the thermos flask, he subconsciously swallowed a mouthful of saliva. However, he couldn't do it no matter what. She turned her head away to avoid looking at him. She carefully placed the infant beside her. Shin Luo, Anne's face tightened. "Are you trying to starve your child to death by not drinking water? When he wakes up, he won't even have a sip of milk. Isn't that pitiful?" Shin Manting gulped again, averted her eyes, and extended her hand. The water temperature was just right. Shin Manting drank so quickly that her throat hurt. But at least he had quenched his thirst. She handed the cup back to him, wiped her chin and asked, "What do you want?" Chapter 1950. Everyone knew. Shin Manting's heart was as clear as a mirror. But go back with him? She looked up at Shin Luo-han. In her heart, there was only resistance. If she went back with him, what awaited her would be endless torture. She had finally managed to escape and he wanted her to go back? Dream on. It's fine if you don't go back. Get discharged first. I'll hire a nanny to take care of you. Shin Luo and stood tall and looked down at her. I want to see the child, but Julia brought his girlfriend home recently and I can't get away. Oh, Shin Manting replied. Then go take a photo. Shin Luo and looked at her with a sullen face and said, it's best if you go back with me. Do you think that's possible? I'm old. To be fair, I treat you well. Yes, but someone treats me badly. Shin Manting lowered her head. Go. You don't have to worry about me and the child. This is my child. Don't you have any shame? Shin Manting glared at him angrily. When did my child become your child? Shin Manting didn't lower her voice. Many people in the ward looked over. Shin Luo and didn't seem to care and said, if it's not my child, who did you have it with? The heir? I had it with someone else. Shin Manting clearly felt all kinds of gossipy gazes coming from around her. She was a little angry, but she quickly whispered, I don't want to talk to you about this here. Go away. Well, then I'll get you discharged. Shin Luo and turned and walked away as he spoke. Shin Manting was annoyed and said, Shin Luo, and why are you so nosy? However, Shin Luo and had already walked away as if he hadn't heard her. The other mothers in the ward looked at each other. Shin Manting clearly heard the mother in the next bed say to the mother in the other bed, I thought she was pregnant before marriage. Turns out she has a man. That man is quite handsome. Why is he like this? He's also nice. He didn't wake her up. He stood there for a long time, but as soon as he woke up, he quarreled. Sigh, some people just don't know how lucky they are. If I had such a handsome man, I would die of laughter. Shin Manting felt like she was sitting on pins and needles. She looked at the child in her arms and wanted to get up. She hadn't urinated for a long time, and the moment she got up, she felt the urge to go to the toilet. He carried the child and got up, but as soon as he got off the bed, he felt his legs go soft. She almost fell. She held onto the edge of the bed to steady herself and walked to the bathroom. There was a tray in the toilet for mothers and children. Shin Manting placed the baby on it and went to the toilet herself before she came out. As soon as she came out, she saw Shin Luo An's anxious expression. Shin Luo An's expression softened when he saw her. He heaved a sigh of relief and said, What's going on? Why did you bring your child to the toilet? What if I accidentally fall? Shin Manting felt a pang in her heart. As expected, a man who doesn't love you has a strange focus. He was actually worried that she would drop the baby? She pursed her lips and walked towards her bed with the child in her arms. Let me give you a hug. Shin Luo and looked at her pink face, and his heart was filled with desire. This was his first child. Chapter 1951. I've already gone through the discharge procedures. This bed is not yours anymore. Shin Luo and looked at her. Which things are yours? I'll pack them up for you. Shin Manting's expression suddenly changed and she roared, What right do you have to do that? I'm the child's father. I have the right to take care of your body. Shin Luo and pulled her up. How can you take care of your body here? Come back with me. Look at this ward. Which woman is thinner than you? How can you take care of the child if you're so thin? Shin Manting didn't know if it was an illusion, but she heard some heartache in Shin Luo An's voice. She looked at Shin Luo and then saw that his face was unfriendly. He had lost a lot of weight compared to before. During this period of time, he had also experienced a lot of things. Shin Manting pursed her lips and didn't speak under the gazes of the gossipy people around her. Shin Luo and looked around and found nothing special. He said, Buy whatever you need. Change your clothes. I brought you a set of clothes. As he spoke, he picked up 2 paper bags from the ground. Shin Manting saw that there was a bunch of flowers and a fruit basket on the ground. The flowers were beautiful and bright, and the fruit basket was beautiful and fresh. Shin Manting took the paper bag and saw that there was a down jacket inside. The color was beige, which used to be her favorite color. In the other bag was a slightly thin dress. She lifted it up and found clean underwear underneath. I'll wait for you here. Shin Luo and sat down and reached out to pick up the child. However, Shin Manting didn't hand the child to him. She carried the 2 bags into the mother and baby's room and put the child down before she changed her clothes with peace of mind. She didn't dare to give the child to him. If Shin Luo and took the child away, she would really have nothing. After changing her clothes, Shin Manting glanced at her appearance in the mirror. Her face was sallow and her overly thin cheeks were slightly sunken. Her hair was messy and she didn't take care of it at all. She untied her loose ponytail and carefully tied up her hair. After wiping her face, she walked out with the child in her arms. The child had been sleeping as if he didn't feel hungry and slept carefreely. When she walked out, the other young mothers in the ward felt that Shin Manting's body had a new look. So beautiful. Clothes make the man. Hey, why do you have to be so pretentious when you have such a good man? I thought you were a girl from some family who secretly came here to give birth. That's right, you're going home with your man. These clothes aren't cheap, right? They look really good. Envious voices and secretly jealous gazes. Shin Manting accepted them one by one but didn't respond. Shin Luo and squatted down and took out a shoe box. He said, "Wear shoes. 37, right? I don't think I'm mistaken." "You're wrong." Shin Manting lowered her head. "I'm wearing a 38. But he still stretched out his leg and stepped on it. He stuffed it in but it didn't fit. She raised her eyes to look at Shin Luo and an uncomfortable thought came to her mind. Yu wore a 36 and she wore a 38. Shin Luo and probably couldn't remember who was who, so he bought a number in the middle? Thinking of this, his eyes were filled with mockery. However, she still hugged the baby tightly and refused to let go. "I want to eat." "Okay, let's go home first." Chapter 1952. Shin Luo and looked at her vigilant face and felt a little upset. After a moment of silence he said, "I rented a small house nearby. We can stay there for the time being." Shin Manting was slightly relieved when she heard that. "Well, let's go." Shin Manting held the baby in her arms and walked forward. Shin Luo and looked at her back and moved his lips, but he didn't say anything. Although it was nearby, it was impossible to walk there. They took a taxi and sat in the back. The baby was very quiet. But when they reached the place, the baby suddenly struggled and cried. He opened his mouth and cried. Shin Manting's heart ached when she heard it. She gently patted his little body and said, don't cry. Mommy will take you to sleep." Her every movement was filled with the radiance of motherly love. Shin Luo and stared at this woman deeply, and there was a strange feeling in his heart. This was his sister and the mother of his child. This strange and magical relationship made Shin Luo and feel very complicated. They opened the door and walked in together. Shin Manting found that this place had been lived before. But the furniture was relatively new, and there were fresh flowers on the table. Obviously Shin Luo and lived here. Shin Luo and had always had a little habit. There needed to be fresh flowers in the room and in the office. It had nothing to do with aesthetics. Sometimes it could be roses and lilies, which were fragrant and beautiful, and sometimes it could be sunflowers or stars. Now there was a calla lily on the table. Shin Manting glanced at it, then sat down with the baby in her arms and lifted her clothes to feed the baby. Shin Manting seemed a little embarrassed with her back to Shin Luo on. The baby stopped after a few breaths, then closed his eyes and continued to sleep. "Go to the room and change your clothes. I'll get you pajamas." Shin Luo and turned and went into the only room in the house. Shin Manting looked around and found that there was indeed only one room. There was only one room. Did Shin Luo and want to sleep with her? She was shocked and stood up subconsciously. She wanted to leave with the baby in her arms. Enough. She had enough of that kind of life. Now that the baby was just born, she couldn't support him at all. Shin Manting suddenly regretted it. I shouldn't have. She shouldn't have agreed to go with him at the hospital. Now, he had merely moved from the cage of the imperial capital to another cage. Her heart trembled and she got up to open the door. When Shin Luo and walked out with a set of clean pajamas, he saw Shin Manting trying to open the door. His face darkened and he quickly stepped forward and roared, "It's already so late, what are you trying to do?" Shin Manting froze when she heard that. Then he opened the door and walked out. However, Shin Luo and was obviously faster. He stepped forward and grabbed her hand saying, "Behave yourself. It's very windy outside. If you catch a cold and fall ill, I won't be the one suffering." Shin Manting froze and turned to look at him. It was hard to imagine that Shin Luo and was the one who had said those words. Shin Luo and felt a little uncomfortable under her gaze. He pulled her inside and locked the door. He threw the pajamas to her and said, "Change your clothes and go rest. What do you want to eat? I'll go buy it for you." You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.